It was a quiet day in the courtroom, the kind of quiet that weighed heavy with anticipation, the kind that had everyone on edge. The air felt thick, as if something was about to explode. Elon Musk stood at the front of the room, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an unsettling calm. His sharp eyes scanned the room, focusing on the judge who was seated high above him. Judge Margaret Pierce, known for her dry wit and no-nonsense attitude, was watching him closely, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Today was no ordinary day. This was the day that could change everything. Musk had been in court before, of course. He was no stranger to the media circus that often followed his every move. But this time felt different. There was something personal about it. Something that made him feel like a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. The case was set to be a major one. A dispute over a major tech acquisition that had stirred up enough controversy to make headlines for weeks. And the stakes were high. If Musk lost, he would lose much more than just money or a company. He would lose the trust of the public, the media, and most importantly, the very people who had supported him throughout his career. As the proceedings began, Musk sat quietly in the defendant's chair, his fingers drumming rhythmically on the table. His mind was focused, sharp, calculating. He knew how to play the game. But today, he had the feeling that the rules were about to change. Judge Pierce cleared her throat and looked down at the papers in front of her. She was known for her sharp wit and ability to cut through any pretense. And today, she wasn't holding back. "I have to say, Mr. Musk, I find it rather amusing that you've decided to grace us with your presence today," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I wasn't aware that CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies had the time for such trivial matters." The courtroom erupted in a soft murmur. The tension in the room grew palpable, but Musk didn't flinch. His face remained a mask of calm as he met the judge's gaze. "Judge Pierce," he replied coolly, his voice steady, "I'm here because I believe in doing things the right way. And this, what's happening here today, is just another obstacle I'm willing to overcome." But Pierce wasn't done. She leaned forward, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "Overcome? You seem to forget, Mr. Musk, that this isn't some tech startup you can disrupt with a few clever ideas. You're not running a rocket company here. This is the law, and it plays by different rules." Musk's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't respond immediately. He could feel the weight of the judge's words, but he wasn't about to let her get under his skin. He had faced worse than this. The media, the critics, the relentless pressure. It was nothing new. But this was different. And then, just when it seemed like the moment would pass, something unexpected happened. Musk's hand slid into his jacket pocket, and from it, he pulled out a small, silver badge. It gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights, catching everyone's attention. The room fell silent. Even Judge Pierce seemed taken aback for a moment, her eyes widening slightly as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. A badge. But not just any badge. It was the unmistakable emblem of the United States Secret Service. "Mr. Musk, what is this?" Pierce asked, her voice trailing off as she tried to regain her composure. Musk held the badge up for everyone to see, his expression unwavering. "This," he said quietly, "is something I have every right to use when necessary. A reminder that no one is above the law, but neither am I." The tension in the room escalated, the silence thickening as everyone processed what had just happened. Was it a bluff? Or was this something far more serious than anyone had anticipated? The courtroom was filled with whispers. Some couldn't believe their eyes, others weren't sure whether to be impressed or alarmed. And then, the judge, who had been trying to maintain control of the situation, finally spoke up. "Mr. Musk, you're in contempt of this court. If you think you can intimidate me with this thing, you're gravely mistaken," she said, her voice now stern. Musk didn't back down. "I'm not here to intimidate anyone, Judge. I'm simply here to ensure that justice is served, no matter the cost." A long, uncomfortable silence followed. The room was still, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Judge Pierce stared at Musk for a long moment, her lips pressed tightly together as she considered her next move. She was not the kind of person who backed down easily, and this situation was unlike anything she had encountered before. But Musk, standing firm, was unshaken. He knew that this was just the beginning. He had thrown a gauntlet, and now the game was on. "Mr. Musk, I will allow this hearing to proceed. But understand this," Pierce said, her voice now low and measured. "This is not a game, and you are not the one in control here." Musk's lips curled into a faint smile. "We'll see about that, Judge," he replied. "We'll see about that." As the proceedings continued, the mood in the courtroom shifted. No one knew exactly what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just another day in court. And Elon Musk was about to show everyone exactly how far he was willing to go to win. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had always been a man who thrived on challenge, but his road to the courtroom had been anything but smooth. His life had been a series of battles, both personal and professional, many of which the public never saw. People often saw him as the fearless innovator, the genius behind Tesla and SpaceX, but few understood the weight of the years that had shaped him into the man standing in front of them today. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Musk's childhood was far from idyllic. His parents, Errol and May, were both brilliant in their own right, but their relationship was strained. Musk's father, a man of few words but many opinions, had a reputation for being tough and demanding. May, on the other hand, was a model and dietitian who had an air of elegance about her, but she wasn't always present in young Elon's life. She traveled frequently for work, and when she was home, her attention was often divided between Elon and his two siblings. As a child, Musk had a voracious appetite for knowledge. He was always reading books about science, technology, engineering, and science fiction. His interest in technology was clear even at a young age, but so were the seeds of a deeper longing. Elon had always felt like an outsider in his own family, like he was living in a world that didn't quite understand him. His father was especially critical, pushing him relentlessly, but never offering the validation that Elon craved. His mother, despite her love for him, was emotionally distant, preoccupied with her own career. This emotional distance became the root of many of Musk's insecurities. He didn't find solace in relationships the way other people did. Instead, he poured himself into his work, pushing his mind to its limits, using his intellect to escape the loneliness that seemed to haunt him. This self-imposed isolation became the hallmark of Musk's personality as he grew older. When Musk moved to Canada at the age of 17, it was the beginning of his independence. He attended Queen's University in Ontario before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. It was here that he began to forge his path in the tech world, driven by a desire to change the world. But even as his ideas grew bolder, his personal life remained in turmoil. Relationships came and went, and he struggled with finding a sense of belonging. By the time Musk had founded Zip2, the company that would later be sold for $307 million, he was already experiencing the pressures of success. But it wasn't the money or the accolades that mattered to him. It was the feeling of building something that could change the world. The same drive that had pushed him to start his first company was the same drive that would lead him to launch PayPal and later Tesla and SpaceX. But with each success came more scrutiny and more criticism. People loved to build him up, only to tear him down once he reached the heights they had set for him. Musk's public persona was constantly at odds with his private struggles. He was a visionary, yes, but he was also deeply flawed, struggling with the weight of his ambition and the crushing loneliness that often accompanied it. The pressure to succeed weighed heavily on him, and though he often appeared calm and collected, his mind was often racing with thoughts of failure, insecurity, and doubt. His relationship with his family continued to remain strained, especially with his father, who he felt had never truly supported him. The few times they did communicate, the conversations were tense and uncomfortable. There was a deep rift between them, one that Musk had never been able to bridge. And while his relationship with his mother remained cordial, it was clear that they both had different priorities and very different lives. Musk's private battles extended to his relationships with those closest to him. He was married twice and had a handful of significant relationships, but none of them lasted. His tendency to immerse himself in his work, sometimes at the expense of his personal life, made it difficult for him to maintain stable relationships. His ex-wives and partners, while understanding of his ambition, often found themselves in the shadow of his overwhelming drive to change the world. Yet, in the midst of it all, Musk found a purpose. The world was full of problems, but he had a vision for how to solve them. From creating affordable electric cars to sending humans to Mars, Musk was determined to leave his mark on the world. The idea of building a future that was not dependent on fossil fuels, of creating a multi-planetary species, consumed him. He became obsessed with making his vision a reality, often to the detriment of his health and relationships. Despite the personal cost, Musk had achieved the impossible. Tesla had become the leader in electric vehicles, SpaceX had revolutionized space travel, and his other ventures, including the Boring Company and Neuralink, were gaining traction. But even as his wealth and influence grew, so did the pressure. The higher he climbed, the more enemies he made, and the more scrutiny he faced. And now, standing in the courtroom, Musk was facing yet another challenge. But this time, it wasn't just about money or technology. This time, it was about power. The kind of power that could shape the future of not just his companies, but of the nation itself. And the game had changed. It wasn't just about innovation anymore. It was about surviving the system that was designed to crush anyone who tried to break it. His past, his upbringing, his personal struggles, his relationships, had all led to this moment. The courtroom was just another battlefield, a place where the rules were bent and twisted by those in control. But Musk had never been one to follow the rules. He had always believed that the world was made to be disrupted, that the future wasn't something to be feared, but something to be built. He was ready for whatever came next. The tension in the courtroom was thick, almost palpable. The earlier incident, when Elon Musk had flashed his USSS badge, had left the entire room in stunned silence. For a moment, it felt as though the world outside had paused, waiting for the next move. But now, the quiet had given way to an undercurrent of anxiety and confusion. Everyone knew that something significant had just happened, but no one quite understood the full implications. Judge Margaret Pierce stared at Musk, her face a study of disbelief and irritation. She wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not in her own courtroom. The usual power dynamic had shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated, and she wasn't about to let this slide without making her stance clear. "Mr. Musk," Judge Pierce began, her voice colder now, "this is a court of law. Your stunt may have worked on social media, but it will not work here." She slammed her gavel down, the sound echoing through the room. "I suggest you put that badge away and focus on the matter at hand." Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he casually placed the badge back in his pocket, never breaking eye contact with the judge. He knew the move had disrupted the flow of the trial, but he wasn't backing down. This wasn't just a personal battle for him. This was a fight for something bigger, his reputation, his companies, and the very future of his vision. "I'm here to ensure the law is respected," Musk replied, his voice unwavering. "You may not like it, but I'm not the only one who can play this game." He allowed a slight pause, letting his words sink in before continuing. "What's happening here today goes beyond the charges against me. This is about a system that's been rigged against those who want to change the world. I'll do what it takes to make sure that doesn't happen." The courtroom was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. The kind that told you everyone in the room was trying to process what Musk had just said, and what he might do next. Judge Pierce adjusted her glasses and shifted in her seat. "I'm warning you, Mr. Musk, this behavior will not be tolerated. If you continue to disrupt these proceedings, I'll have no choice but to hold you in contempt of court." Her tone was stern, but there was an underlying hint of uncertainty. She wasn't entirely sure how to deal with this new version of Musk. His reputation preceded him, but this bold move had caught her off guard. Elon Musk leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in front of him as though he were contemplating his next move in a high-stakes chess game. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the faces of the lawyers, the jury, and the spectators. It was almost as if he were assessing the battlefield. The prosecutor, a tall man with a cold, methodical demeanor, was the first to speak after a tense silence. "Mr. Musk, "You've had your moment," he said, his voice laced with thinly veiled contempt. "But this is a court of law, not a circus. If you want to play games, perhaps you should find another stage." Musk turned his gaze to the prosecutor, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm not here to play games, my friend," he said. "I'm here to make sure that justice is done. If you want to focus on me instead of the case, that's your prerogative. But let's be clear. I'll be the one defining how this game is played." The prosecutor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the judge, his frustration evident. Musk was throwing the kind of unpredictability into the trial that could shake things up, and the prosecutor wasn't prepared for this kind of opponent. Judge Pierce, clearly trying to regain control, took a deep breath. "Enough," she said firmly. "We will proceed with the hearing, and I expect this nonsense to stop immediately." But the damage had been done. The dynamics in the room had shifted. It was no longer just about the legal battle at hand. It was about power, influence, and control. Musk had thrown the first punch, and now everyone knew he wasn't going to back down. It was around mid-afternoon when the atmosphere in the courtroom changed once again. The jury was looking worn, and there was an air of restlessness in the room. Musk, ever the strategist, had anticipated this fatigue, and he had planned his next move with surgical precision. The time had come to shift the narrative. He couldn't simply keep reacting to the attacks. It was time to take control of the story. The judge, who had remained noticeably more guarded since the morning's dramatic moments, leaned forward and signaled to the prosecution to continue. Musk's lawyers, a sharp group of professionals who knew how to work the room, remained calm. They'd prepared meticulously for this day, but they had no way of predicting Musk's unpredictable brilliance. The prosecutor, a man named William Kavanaugh, stood up with a slight sneer, his face filled with the arrogance of someone who believed he already had the upper hand. "Your Honor, Mr. Musk has tried to derail this case with theatrics and grandstanding. This is not a case of power or influence, but of greed and deception, and we have the evidence to prove it." Musk's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained neutral. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He had the perfect counterattack up his sleeve, one that would completely change the direction of the trial. Kavanaugh continued, presenting what appeared to be damning evidence. A series of emails from Musk's company, Tesla, showing that he had misled investors about certain projections regarding the company's financial outlook. The emails were dated from just before Tesla's stock price had soared. The implication was clear. Musk had knowingly manipulated the stock market. The gallery shifted in their seats, whispers circulating once again. The prosecution was confident that this was the evidence that would bury Musk. They had him now, or so they thought. As the court session resumed, the atmosphere had changed. Musk's mere presence had become a force to be reckoned with, and even those who had come in expecting a straightforward case couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The media, sitting in the back of the room, scribbled down notes, already preparing their headlines. This was no longer a simple legal proceeding. This was an event. The rest of the morning passed in a blur, but the tension never really left. Every word from the prosecution was met with Musk's calm, calculated responses. His demeanor was still that of someone who knew the stakes, but who also had a sense of control that unsettled those around him. It wasn't arrogance. It was something more dangerous. Musk had always operated with the knowledge that he had the ability to change the rules. And that was exactly what he was doing now. During a brief recess, Musk stepped out of the courtroom, his mind racing. This trial wasn't just about defending himself against the charges. This was a test of something far deeper. His ability to challenge the system, to confront the powers that had been trying to crush his vision for years. This was a battle that went beyond the courtroom. It was about showing the world that the system could be bent to his will. As Musk walked down the hallway of the courthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. The people in the courtroom, the ones who seemed so intent on taking him down, they weren't the real enemy. No, the true battle was against a system that was designed to stifle innovation, to maintain the status quo. He had never been one to back down from a fight, and this was no exception. Musk wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for the future. A future where the world wasn't controlled by outdated systems and hierarchies. A future where new ideas could thrive, where people like him, who dared to dream big, could change the world. But he wasn't alone in this fight. As he walked back into the courtroom, he knew that there were others watching, people who shared his vision, who had stood by him through thick and thin. The journey ahead was going to be long and treacherous, but Musk was ready, and he knew that this was only the beginning. As the trial continued into the afternoon, the tension in the courtroom felt as though it was building towards something monumental. Elon Musk had made his mark in the morning session, and his defiant presence was still a heavy shadow over the proceedings. But now, he had to navigate the long game. This wasn't going to be an easy win. The powers at play were bigger than any one individual, and Musk knew that he couldn't just play the same old tricks. He needed to go deeper. He needed to make the kind of move that would set him apart. Musk's lawyer, a man named David Hall, stood and immediately objected. Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution is presenting this evidence out of context. The emails in question have been selectively chosen to paint a biased narrative. Judge Pierce paused, taking a moment to review the documents on her desk. Musk had anticipated this, too. He knew the prosecution was counting on the fact that he had been reckless in certain moments, but what they didn't know was that he had already prepared his defense. He had planted a bombshell in the courtroom, waiting for the right moment. Turning his chair slightly to the side, Musk glanced toward his legal team, and then toward the jury. With a look of quiet resolve, he stood up and addressed the room. Your Honor, he began, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. I'm not here to hide behind a legal defense. I'm here to stand up for the truth, for my company, and for my vision. But let me make one thing perfectly clear. I don't play by the rules that have been set up to trap people like me. I didn't get to where I am by following the status quo. I got here by breaking the system. Musk took a deep breath, allowing his words to settle in. He knew that this was a high-risk maneuver, but he had made a career out of defying expectations, and today was no different. The entire room fell silent. Musk wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was offering something far more radical. He was suggesting that the rules of the game were fundamentally flawed, and that the very structure of corporate power was broken. He wasn't just fighting for his personal freedom, but for the ability to change the way the world worked. He turned to the judge. Judge Pierce, I'm not denying the emails, but the context is everything. The truth is, I knew Tesla was on the verge of a breakthrough. What we had achieved was bigger than just numbers. It was the future. And yes, I projected that future to investors because I believed in it. I still believe in it. But this isn't about manipulation. This is about ambition. This is about creating something that's never been done before. And sometimes that means pushing the envelope. He paused and met the eyes of the jury, his gaze steady and unyielding. I understand that the law is important, but it's the people who drive the law forward. It's the people who challenge it, who innovate, who change the world. Without people like me, like those who build the future, we would still be living in the past. Musk had turned the tables, but he knew the real challenge had just begun. The prosecution was licking its wounds, but they weren't going to back down. The rest of the trial would be grueling, and every move had to be calculated. Today, the stakes were higher. The emotional tension had reached a boiling point, and everyone in the room felt it. Judge Pierce called the court to order, her voice steady, but there was something in her demeanor that suggested she, too, was still processing Musk's audacious defense. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence as she addressed the room. We've heard Mr. Musk's defense, and we've seen his determination to redefine the narrative, she began, her voice even but firm. However, this trial is about the facts. It's about determining whether Mr. Musk engaged in illegal actions. This is not about rhetoric or philosophy. We will now proceed with the examination of the evidence. The prosecutor, William Kavanaugh, stood up, his face tight with frustration but his professional mask firmly in place. Your Honor, I would like to call forth the next piece of evidence, which directly contradicts Mr. Musk's defense. We've already shown his financial misdeeds, but now, we'll show how these actions have directly affected ordinary people, the investors who trusted his words and lost everything. He turned to the courtroom's large screen, and a set of images flashed onto it. Charts showing Tesla's stock fluctuations, financial reports, and news headlines detailing the aftermath of the price spike that Musk had created. The images painted a picture of chaos, stock prices rising and falling dramatically, with thousands of investors caught in the middle, some of them losing millions in the blink of an eye. The images were stark, and the room fell into an uncomfortable quiet. The reality of what Musk's actions had done to real people, ordinary people, was undeniable. For the first time, Musk felt a sharp pang of guilt. These weren't just numbers on a screen. These were lives, futures altered by his decisions. And in this moment, the weight of those consequences hit him harder than he cared to admit. Kavanaugh continued, his voice rising with confidence. Mr. Musk's actions were not just reckless. They were deliberate. He misled the public, manipulated the stock market for his own personal gain, and in the process, he hurt real people. These investors were left to pick up the pieces of his ambitions. We have the proof. Musk could feel the walls closing in. His mind raced. How could he fight this? How could he refute the undeniable damage caused by his actions? For a brief moment, the courtroom felt suffocating, the stakes higher than they had ever been before. This wasn't just about proving innocence. It was about justifying his life's work, his purpose, the very essence of who he was. Was he a man who had sacrificed his morals for success? Or was he truly fighting for a better future, no matter the cost? There was a shift in the room as Musk's words sunk in. The jury exchanged glances, some looking pensive, others skeptical. The prosecution seemed rattled, unsure of how to respond to this impassioned plea. Even Judge Pierce seemed taken aback, though she quickly regained her composure. I have been called reckless, arrogant, and ambitious, Musk continued, his voice now taking on a more personal tone. But let me tell you what I really am. I am a man who is willing to sacrifice everything for a better future. I have spent my life doing just that. I have faced failure, doubt, and opposition at every turn. But I'm still here, because I believe in something greater than myself. And if that's a crime, then I'll take it. But I refuse to be a part of a system that discourages the kind of innovation this country was built on. The weight of his words hung in the air. For the first time since the trial had started, there was a palpable sense of hope in the room. Musk wasn't just defending his actions, he was defining his entire life's purpose. It was clear that this wasn't just about protecting his company or his reputation. This was about standing up for everything he believed in. Judge Pierce finally broke the silence. Mr. Musk, I can't deny that your words have been impactful. But this is not a place for rhetoric. This is a place for facts. I will allow your defense to continue, but I warn you, you are treading on dangerous ground. Musk nodded, but his eyes were clear and focused. I've always been on dangerous ground, Your Honor. But that's where real change happens. The room was still, but the atmosphere had shifted. Musk had injected a sense of urgency and purpose into the trial that no one had expected. It was no longer just a case about misleading investors. It was about the future of innovation, about the clash between a system that tried to stifle progress and the people who dared to push beyond it. As the trial broke for the evening, Musk sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next. The following day, the courtroom was filled with an unmistakable sense of anticipation. Elon Musk had made a statement the previous day that had not only rattled the prosecution but had shaken the very foundations of the trial itself. His words about innovation, ambition, and challenging the status quo had left a mark on the jury, the press, and even the judge. The quiet murmur in the gallery was different now, more respectful, almost contemplative. It was as if they were watching a spectacle unfold, not just a legal battle. The jury watched him closely, their eyes fixed on his every move, their faces unreadable. Musk's lawyer, David Hall, had remained quiet throughout the presentation of the evidence, but now he stood up. He moved toward Musk, placing a hand on his shoulder. Elon, Hall said softly, this is the moment we need to address the bigger picture. It's not about the stock market. It's about what you've created. It's about the change you've ignited. The future of humanity depends on what you're doing. Don't let them take that from you. Musk nodded, though his mind was a whirlwind of doubt and determination. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't run from the consequences, but he also couldn't let them overshadow everything he had built. This trial, this moment, it wasn't just about defending his past mistakes. It was about proving the worth of his mission and reminding the world why it was worth taking risks, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. He rose slowly, his hands clasped in front of him, and for the first time in the trial, he didn't speak immediately. The room held its breath as he took a moment to gather his thoughts. The stakes had never been higher, and this wasn't just another speech. This was his redemption. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight, "I have never made a decision lightly. I have faced setbacks, failures, and ridicule from the very moment I decided to pursue a vision that no one else believed in. But I've always been clear on one thing. The world cannot move forward without risk, without the willingness to push boundaries and break free from the chains that hold us back." He paused, taking a breath as his gaze swept across the jury, looking each person in the eye. "I understand the damage that was caused. I know that some investors lost money, and I don't take that lightly. But the truth is, I never promised anyone that there wouldn't be risks. What I did promise, and what I have delivered on, is a future that is cleaner, more sustainable, and more innovative. Tesla, SpaceX, SolarCity, they are not just companies. They are the future. And I'm not here just to defend myself. I'm here to remind you that there is a larger story at play." Musk's words resonated through the room. The emotional weight of his speech hung in the air. But there was something more. The unshakable conviction in his voice that this was about more than just his trial. This was a battle for something bigger, something more important than any courtroom could contain. "For every risk I've taken, there have been thousands of people who have benefited. Every innovation, every breakthrough, every product that's come from Tesla or SpaceX, these are not just business ventures. They are a testament to the belief that progress is worth fighting for." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "So yes, I take responsibility for the mistakes I've made. But I also take responsibility for the vision I've built, for the future that we are creating together. I'm asking you to look beyond the numbers. Look beyond the damage. See the bigger picture. The future we are building is worth the fight." As he finished speaking, a silence fell over the courtroom. It wasn't the silence of indifference. It was the silence of a room holding its breath, waiting for what came next. Judge Pierce sat motionless, her face inscrutable. The jury was still, but there was a change in their expressions, something subtle shifting in their eyes. The weight of Musk's words had landed, and for the first time in the trial it was clear. This wasn't just about a legal case. This was about a legacy. In that moment, Elon Musk had not only defended himself, he had reignited the fire of his mission. And while the outcome of the trial was still uncertain, one thing was unmistakable. The fight for the future had only just begun. The days following Musk's impassioned speech were a whirlwind. The emotional tension that had boiled over in the courtroom was still palpable, but the focus had shifted. No longer was this just a case about the law or stock market manipulation. It had become a battle for the future, a fight for the very idea of progress. The courtroom had shifted from a place of mere legal combat to an arena where Musk was fighting to preserve a legacy, to convince people that his vision was worth the price it exacted. Despite the shift in tone, the prosecution wasn't backing down. William Kavanaugh, the lead prosecutor, was more determined than ever to ensure Musk faced the full consequences of his actions. As the case resumed, the atmosphere in the courtroom was charged, but there was a growing sense of inevitability. Judge Pierce called the court to order once again, her gavel striking sharply against the wood, signaling the beginning of a pivotal day in the trial. Musk sat at the defense table, his eyes fixed on the front of the room. His legal team had spent the night preparing a counter to the prosecution's next set of evidence. This time, it wasn't just about refuting the stock price manipulations or his behavior during the rise of Tesla. The prosecution had found something deeper, something personal, something that could shake Musk to his core. Kavanaugh stood, his face betraying a cold satisfaction as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence that we believe will conclusively prove Mr. Musk's guilt. This evidence is not just about the stock market, but about the man himself, the choices he made, and the toll those choices took on his family. A low murmur ran through the courtroom. Musk's lawyers tensed. There was something about Kavanaugh's tone that made it clear this evidence was more than just another paper trail. This was something personal. Musk shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had known this was coming. The prosecutors had been hinting at it for weeks, but the reality of it still sent a chill through him. Kavanaugh motioned for the screen to turn on. A series of private emails flashed onto the screen, most of them containing personal exchanges between Musk and his family. The emails were clearly intimate, discussing the toll that Musk's relentless work ethic and obsession with his businesses had taken on his personal life. There were messages from his ex-wife, from his children, pleading with him to spend more time with them, to stop pushing everything aside for work. The prosecutor's voice rang out, cutting through the thick silence in the room. These emails show that while Mr. Musk was manipulating markets and deceiving investors, he was also neglecting the people closest to him. The price of his ambition was not just felt in the market, it was felt in his family. The room was still as the emails scrolled across the screen. Musk's face remained stoic, but inside, something twisted. He could feel the weight of those words. The guilt was unavoidable. How many times had he prioritized the work, the mission, over everything else? His children, his relationships, the people who had sacrificed just as much for his dreams. And now, it was all laid bare for everyone to see. Kavanaugh paused, allowing the images to sink in. This is the man we're dealing with. A man who will stop at nothing to achieve his goals, even if it means sacrificing everything. His family, his morals, and his humanity. There it was, the turning point. This wasn't just a trial about business. This was about the kind of person Elon Musk was, about the human cost of his vision. The prosecution had pushed him to the edge, and now they were trying to expose him for the man he was beneath the veneer of innovation and ambition. Musk's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced. Was this really the end of it? Was his entire life's work, everything he had fought for, about to be overshadowed by his personal failures? His shoulders slumped slightly as the reality of the situation set in. He wasn't just defending his career anymore. He was defending the very essence of who he was. But then, something inside him shifted. The realization came, like a flash of clarity. This trial wasn't just about his business practices or his family life. It was about his legacy, the story of a man who had tried to change the world, no matter the cost. Musk stood slowly, his movements deliberate. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, but now there was something different about him. He wasn't just a defendant. He was a man who had lived through the consequences of his actions, both the triumphs and the failures. I accept the fact that my ambition has cost me, Musk said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. It has cost me relationships, time, and in some cases, my own peace of mind. I've failed in ways that I can't undo. I've made decisions that have hurt people, including those I love. And for that, I am deeply sorry. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. There was no bravado now, no deflection, just raw honesty. But I won't apologize for the vision that drove me, he continued, his voice growing stronger. I won't apologize for trying to change the world. Yes, there were costs, but there were also lives changed for the better. There are people who now drive electric cars because of Tesla. There are people who have jobs at SpaceX, who work on technologies that will take us to Mars. And there are millions of people whose lives will be impacted by the work I've done, even if I wasn't always the perfect father, husband, or friend. The jury watched him closely. Musk's words seemed to echo in the silence, but this time, it wasn't just a defense. It was a confession of sorts, a recognition that ambition, in the pursuit of greatness, often comes with sacrifice. He wasn't hiding behind his success. He wasn't using his work to shield himself from the consequences of his personal life. The silence in the room stretched. Musk's words had struck a chord. He had laid himself bare, acknowledging his flaws, his mistakes, but also reaffirming the importance of his mission. He had shown the jury that despite his personal failures, the work he had done, whether or not they agreed with his methods, was larger than him. It was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. Your Honor, members of the jury, Musk concluded, his voice now resolute, I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I am asking for understanding. The work I've done, the innovations I've brought to the world, are not the result of a man who was willing to hurt others. They are the result of a man who saw something that others didn't, a future that was worth the cost. Musk's gaze met the jury's, and for the first time in the trial, there was no uncertainty in his eyes. He had spoken the truth, and in doing so, he had taken control of the narrative. Judge Pierce sat back in her chair, her face inscrutable, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of respect, perhaps. The room, once tense and divided, seemed to be holding its breath. Kavanaugh, however, was visibly shaken. He had expected Musk to flounder, to break under the pressure of his personal failings. But what he had gotten instead was a man who faced his own flaws with dignity, a man who refused to be defined by his mistakes. As the court adjourned for the day, the energy in the room was different. The prosecution had thrown their most personal and damaging blow, but Musk had absorbed it, and in doing so, he had transformed the narrative once again. The battle was far from over, but Musk had taken back the reins. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The turning point had arrived, and whatever came next, he knew he would face it head-on. As the courtroom doors closed behind them, a silence enveloped Elon Musk and his legal team. The weight of the day's events hung heavy in the air. His emotional confession had stirred something deeper within him, something more primal. He was not just fighting for his company or his reputation anymore. He was fighting for his humanity, for the very essence of what had driven him through the years of relentless pursuit. The walk back to the defense's war room felt surreal. The world outside had not stopped moving. News outlets were buzzing with the day's events, social media was alive with debate, and public opinion was hanging in the balance. The media's verdict was still in flux, and while the courtroom had been a place of intense scrutiny, the real trial now lay in the court of public opinion. Elon had done the unthinkable. He had admitted to his mistakes and flaws, something he hadn't done openly before. He had shown his vulnerability in a way no one had expected. The emotions had been raw, real, and powerful. But in that honesty, there was something unspoken that had shifted the tides in his favor: hope. Back in the defense room, his lawyer, David Hall, leaned back in his chair, studying Elon carefully. "That was incredible, Elon. You were raw, genuine. You didn't just defend yourself, you connected with them. You put your heart on the line." Elon nodded, but there was a weight to his expression that betrayed a deeper uncertainty. Did it go too far? Was I too vulnerable? "No," David responded quickly, shaking his head. "Vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's what makes you human. That's what they needed to see. You've built an empire, sure, but that doesn't mean you're exempt from the struggles everyone faces. If anything, it showed them you're willing to fight through the toughest moments, even if it costs you personally." But even as David spoke, Elon's mind was racing. The personal cost, the impact on his family, the relationships strained under the weight of his ambitions, was far from gone. He had exposed himself to the world in a way that felt almost too intimate. In some ways, it had felt cathartic, but in others, it had been unsettling. Was the jury really listening? Or had they simply witnessed a man on the edge of collapse? You didn't just admit fault. You admitted that your vision, despite the fallout, is bigger than you, David continued. That's the key. That's the difference. And it's exactly what we needed to shift the narrative. Elon turned to look out the window, his mind returning to the moment when he had opened up in court. Despite his personal turmoil, the belief in his mission had never wavered. He had always known that great change came at a price. The sacrifices, the late nights, the family gatherings that he had missed, it was all part of the cost of trying to change the world. But in that moment, he had realized something crucial. It wasn't just the world he had to change, it was himself. Outside, the media frenzy was relentless. News outlets were abuzz with headlines. He had become a symbol of resilience, a man who had faced the darkest parts of his life and still managed to stand tall. The trial would continue, and there were still many obstacles to overcome, but something had shifted in the air. It was as if the entire room, both inside and outside the courtroom, had started to view Musk not as a villain, but as a flawed man trying to make sense of a complicated world. The next morning, as the trial resumed, Musk's focus was sharper than it had been in weeks. The emotional weight of his earlier testimony had not gone away, but something else had taken its place: resolve. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could take the hits, survive the storm, and keep pushing forward. The prosecution, however, wasn't backing down. William Kavanaugh stood ready, determined to prove that Musk was not only responsible for the financial chaos caused by his actions, but that he had manipulated the trial to gain public sympathy. The next set of witnesses would be critical. These were individuals who had invested their entire livelihoods into Tesla, believing Musk's words without question, only to see their investments plunge as the stock market took an unpredictable dive. As Kavanaugh called his next witness to the stand, a wave of anxiety swept over the defense table. The witness was a former Tesla investor, someone who had suffered significant financial loss. His testimony was sure to be emotional, and it was. "I trusted Elon Musk," the witness said, his voice trembling. "I invested everything I had because I believed in what he was saying. I believed in Tesla, in the future he promised us. And then, when the stock plummeted, when my savings evaporated, it was like a punch in the gut. I was left with nothing. I wasn't the only one. There are hundreds of us." The room fell silent as the man recounted his story, the devastation written on his face. Musk sat motionless, his jaw clenched. The words were sharp, and each one cut deeper than the last. The pain in the man's voice was undeniable. But at the same time, Elon could not help but feel a pang of guilt, a recognition that he was, in part, responsible for the suffering this man had endured. The jury listened carefully. The defense team braced themselves. This was one of the most critical moments of the trial. It was no longer about facts. It was about hearts and minds. When the witness finished, Elon stood up. His movements were slow but deliberate as he walked to the witness stand. He was about to do something that felt right, something that would either make or break the entire case. He turned to the investor, his expression softening. "I understand your pain," Elon said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know what it's like to take risks, to put everything on the line, to believe in something greater than yourself. But I also know that the world of innovation is not a simple, predictable place. It's chaotic, and sometimes that chaos leads to great loss. But it also leads to something else, a chance for growth, for change. I never promised anyone that Tesla's journey would be smooth, but I also never promised that the future of humanity would be easy." His words were not just a defense. They were a reflection of everything he had fought for, everything he had built. "I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you," Elon continued, his gaze steady. "But the world I'm working to build, it's one worth the sacrifice. It's about taking risks. It's about believing in a better future, even when the path isn't clear. I'm not perfect. I never claimed to be. But I believe in what we're doing. I believe it's worth the fight." There was a long silence in the room after he spoke. It wasn't the typical silence that accompanied a question or a statement. This was a silence of contemplation, of recognition. Elon had not offered an excuse. He had offered understanding. The witness sat there, staring at Musk for a long time before responding. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter but thoughtful. "I don't know if I can forgive the losses I've suffered, but I can understand why you did what you did," the man said. "I think, maybe, I see what you were trying to do now." And just like that, something shifted in the room. The tension, once so thick, started to dissipate. The turning point had arrived, not through manipulation, not through force, but through honesty. Elon Musk had taken a step toward redemption, not by evading responsibility, but by embracing it fully, by opening himself up to the world and showing that, beneath the empire and the ambition, there was a man who had learned from his mistakes and was willing to do better. The trial wasn't over, but for the first time in days, Musk felt something stirring within him, a glimmer of hope. It wasn't just about winning. It was about understanding, growth, and perhaps, in the end, redemption. The day after Elon Musk's candid exchange with the Tesla investor, the atmosphere in the courtroom had noticeably shifted. It was as if the entire trial had entered a new phase, one where the stakes were no longer just about the legal technicalities or the financial implications of Musk's decisions. Now, it was about something more profound: character, redemption, and the question of whether Musk's vision could ultimately justify the costs it had imposed on those around him. The defense team, still riding high from the breakthrough in the previous day's testimony, knew that the upcoming days were crucial. The prosecution would undoubtedly escalate their attacks, and the jury had been given a glimpse of Musk's personal side, but they were still waiting to see whether he could weather the storm of the final days of the trial. As Musk sat in the defense chair, his mind was on his next move. The jury's reaction was uncertain, but there had been something in the way they had listened, something in the way their expressions softened when he spoke to the investor that suggested a shift. Could this openness, this rawness, be the key to winning over the court? Or had he revealed too much of himself, too soon? His thoughts were interrupted by David Hall, who stood beside him, reviewing notes on his tablet. The stress of the trial had clearly taken its toll on the defense team as well, but they were resolute. "Elon," David began, looking up from his tablet, "we've got a few more witnesses to go through, but we need to brace ourselves for the prosecution's closing arguments. We know they're going to bring up everything we've worked so hard to defuse. Your personal life, the stock manipulations, everything. But there's one thing we need to prepare for. The judge is starting to show some real interest in what we're presenting. She's been a bit more reserved, but today, I think we might see a change." Musk took a deep breath and nodded. "I've always known it was going to be tough, but this trial has been something else." He paused, running a hand through his hair, looking distant for a moment. "It feels like I've been fighting on all fronts. My companies, my family, my reputation, and yet, I'm still standing. That's got to count for something." David smiled slightly, but it was a tired, worn smile. "You're not just standing, Elon. You're fighting. And that's what matters." Before Musk could respond, the door to the war room opened, and one of his legal team members entered, holding a folder in hand. "Mr. Musk," the lawyer began, "we've got the final round of witnesses for today. And it's a big one. The next witness is someone from your past, a former close associate who has information that could either tip the scales in your favor or bring everything crashing down." Elon's stomach tightened. He had heard rumors that the prosecution had lined up a witness who had known him from his early days in Silicon Valley, someone who could speak to the choices Musk had made when Tesla was just a fledgling company. The idea of facing someone from that era, someone who might offer a less-than-flattering perspective on his drive for success, was unsettling. He nodded grimly. "Let's get this over with." As the trial resumed, Musk was met with a wave of anxiety. The courtroom felt more tense than ever. The prosecution was ready, their eyes locked on Musk like sharks circling their prey. They had a witness, and from the looks on their faces, they knew they had something that could put Musk in a precarious position. The door swung open, and in walked the witness, Gregory Vance. The room seemed to pause for a split second. Gregory had been one of Musk's earliest collaborators back in the days when Tesla was little more than an idea and a handful of engineers working in a garage. He had helped Musk shape the early business strategies, had been a part of the team that fought to keep Tesla afloat when everyone thought it would fail. Gregory's presence was jarring. He looked older than Musk remembered, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had seen the heights of Silicon Valley's most intense startup battles. As he took the stand, a sense of discomfort settled over Musk. This was someone who knew him, perhaps better than most. Someone who had witnessed both the rise of Tesla and the toll it had taken on the people involved. The prosecutor, William Kavanaugh, was quick to begin. "Mr. Vance," Kavanaugh said, "you worked with Elon Musk during some of the most pivotal years of Tesla's growth, correct?" "That's right," Gregory replied, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of something. Was it regret? In his tone. "And can you tell the court about the atmosphere within Tesla during that time? Specifically, the work environment under Mr. Musk's leadership?" Gregory hesitated for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Well, Tesla was always a place of extreme pressure. We were working around the clock to get the company off the ground. It was intense, to say the least. Elon's vision was all-consuming. He pushed everyone, including me, to their limits. It wasn't always easy, but we believed in the mission. We believed in Tesla." Kavanaugh pressed further, leaning in. "And did this drive, this relentless pursuit of success, come at a cost? Did you witness any personal sacrifices, Any moments when the company's success seemed to matter more than the people involved? Gregory paused, and the courtroom fell silent, everyone waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke. Yes, there were sacrifices, Gregory admitted, his voice quiet but firm. Elon's vision came at a cost. Relationships, time with family. We all gave up pieces of our personal lives to make Tesla a reality. And in the early days, there were times when it felt like that vision was all-consuming. It was difficult to see the bigger picture when we were all so caught up in the day-to-day grind. The words hit Elon like a punch to the stomach. He had always known that his ambition had come with consequences. But hearing someone he had worked closely with, someone who had been a part of those formative years, speak so openly about the personal toll of his choices was a sobering moment. Musk knew that Gregory's testimony was not going to be easy to overcome. It was clear that this witness, unlike the others, wasn't simply attacking his character. He was recounting the reality of what it had been like to work alongside him during the formative years of Tesla. There had been pain. There had been loss. And despite everything Musk had achieved, those sacrifices could not be undone. The prosecutor turned to Musk, now visibly tense in his chair, and asked the burning question. Mr. Musk, Kavanaugh began, do you acknowledge that the culture you fostered at Tesla, this drive, this single-minded pursuit of success, came at the expense of the people closest to you? Do you accept that some of your associates, the people who believed in you, may have paid a personal price they were never prepared for? Elon's gaze was fixed on Gregory, but his mind was a whirlwind. He had heard the question, but now it was time to respond, not just as a defendant, but as a man who had lived through the consequences of his own ambition. He stood, his movements slow but measured. Yes, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. I acknowledge that. I've always known that there have been sacrifices, personal, emotional, and professional. It's something I've had to live with every day. But that doesn't change the fact that Tesla was, and is, about more than just making money. It's about changing the world. And yes, the path to get here hasn't been easy, and I've hurt people along the way. But I will never apologize for believing in what we were doing. Because at the end of the day, it was worth it. It still is. The courtroom was silent as Musk finished his statement. His words weren't just a defense of his actions. They were a reflection of everything he had stood for. It wasn't just about success. It was about purpose, about vision, and the toll that comes with pursuing something greater than oneself. As Musk sat back down, he felt something deep inside him shift, a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. The trial was far from over, but he knew one thing for certain. He was not backing down. He would fight for the future he had envisioned, no matter the cost. But in that moment, as the weight of his own words settled around him, he realized that the true fight wasn't just against the prosecution or the courtroom. It was the battle within himself, the struggle to reconcile his ambition with his humanity. And that was a fight he was determined to win. The trial had reached a pivotal moment, and the air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Elon Musk had always been accustomed to pressure, but this felt different. The stakes were no longer just about the fate of Tesla or his reputation. They were about his very identity, his place in the world, and how history would remember him. The days were dragging on, and the courtroom seemed to have become an extension of his own mind, a space where every decision, every word, every move carried the weight of a lifetime of ambition, innovation, and controversy. Elon sat in the defense chair, his mind racing. The testimony from Gregory Vance had left an indelible mark on him. The words still echoed in his mind. It was difficult to see the bigger picture when we were all so caught up in the day-to-day grind. It was a statement that hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. In the pursuit of changing the world, had he forgotten to look after the very people who had helped him get there? Had he sacrificed too much? His own peace, his family, his relationships, in the name of progress? For the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself to pause and reflect. The mission, the goal that had driven him for decades, still burned inside him, but the question of how much was too much lingered in the back of his mind. Was it possible to achieve greatness without losing everything along the way? The courtroom continued around him, the case dragging toward its inevitable conclusion. Kavanaugh, the prosecutor, was preparing for his final arguments. His cross-examination of Musk had been relentless, but Elon had faced every challenge head-on, knowing that the truth, no matter how difficult, was the only thing that could ultimately set him free. Elon, David Hall's voice broke through his thoughts. It's time. Elon took a deep breath. It was his turn to speak, to close the defense's case. He stood up slowly, his knees feeling heavier with each step. As he approached the stand, he felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the usual adrenaline rush he was used to in high-stakes situations. No, this was something different. This was the moment where he had to confront not just the courtroom, but his own conscience. The room fell silent as he took his seat at the witness stand. He could feel the weight of every eye on him. The jurors, the judge, the audience, all of them waiting for him to speak. The question loomed in the air. Would his words be enough to shift the tide in his favor? Would they understand him? Would they see past the persona of the businessman to the man underneath, the one who had sacrificed everything for his dreams? He cleared his throat, meeting the eyes of the jury. His voice, when it came, was steady, but there was a rawness to it, a vulnerability that he had never allowed himself to show before. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Elon began. I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Tesla or SpaceX, but as a man who has spent his life trying to create something greater than himself. I've made mistakes, and I've paid the price for those mistakes. But what I need you to understand is this. Every decision I've made, every risk I've taken, has been in service of something much bigger than myself. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The room was eerily quiet, as though the world had paused with him. I've always believed that humanity's greatest potential lies in our ability to innovate, to push boundaries, and to make the impossible possible. But along the way, I've learned that the cost of that vision is high. It's not just about building cars or rockets. It's about changing the very fabric of how we live, how we think, how we see the future. His voice caught for a moment, but he quickly composed himself. I won't deny that in my pursuit of that vision, I've hurt people. I've made mistakes, some of which I will regret for the rest of my life. But if you ask me if it was worth it, if you ask me if I would do it all over again, my answer is yes. Because the stakes are too high, and the future of humanity is at risk. I'm not perfect, and I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for your understanding. The decisions I made were based on my belief in a future that was better than the present. Elon's gaze shifted to the jury. I know that many of you have had to make sacrifices in your own lives, whether in your careers, your families, or your personal happiness. But those sacrifices are part of the journey. We don't get to change the world by staying comfortable. We change it by taking risks, by challenging the status quo, and sometimes by falling short. He looked directly at the prosecution, at William Kavanaugh. I know you've done your job, and I respect that. But I ask you to consider this. What is the cost of standing still? What is the cost of not striving to make a difference? Because I truly believe that without boldness, without risk, we won't see the future we all want for our children, for our world. There was a pause, a long, pregnant silence. Musk's words had landed heavily, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire room was holding its breath. Elon himself wasn't sure if his plea had been enough to turn the tide. But as he looked around the courtroom, he saw something he hadn't expected, a shift. The expressions on the jurors' faces seemed less skeptical, less critical. There was something softer in their eyes now, something that suggested they were beginning to understand. David Hall stood behind him, his hand resting lightly on Musk's shoulder. Elon knew that his legal team had fought for him with everything they had, but at this moment, it was no longer just about the case. It was about him, the man who had built these empires, who had fought relentlessly for a vision that was both his greatest triumph and his heaviest burden. The defense had made its case. There was nothing more to be said. All that was left was the jury's verdict. As he stepped down from the stand, Elon felt a strange sense of clarity. He wasn't sure how this trial would end, but in that moment, he had said everything that needed to be said. He had opened himself up, vulnerable and honest, and he was no longer running from the consequences of his actions. For the first time, he had truly faced them, and in doing so, he had faced himself. The court session was adjourned for the day, and the room buzzed with the murmur of discussions and speculations. Elon sat in silence, his thoughts a mix of reflection and anticipation. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: peace. The next day, the jury would deliberate. But for Elon, the hardest part was over. He had faced the storm and emerged standing, no matter what the outcome. Now, all he could do was wait and hope. The days after Elon Musk's closing statement felt surreal. The weight of the trial still hung in the air, but for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to step back and let the clock run its course. The jury had retired to deliberate, and with that, there was nothing more for him to do but wait. The waiting was almost unbearable, like the moment before a rocket launch, when everything is set and all that's left is the countdown. Elon tried to occupy his mind with work, but it was difficult to focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to the courtroom, to the faces of the jurors as he spoke. Had they believed him? Had his vulnerability been enough to sway their judgment? Or had it all been in vain? He couldn't shake the memory of Gregory Vance's testimony. The man had been part of the earliest days of Tesla, back when the dream of changing the world had felt almost impossible, back when the sacrifices hadn't yet taken their toll. He had heard Gregory speak of the personal price paid, and for the first time, Elon allowed himself to feel the gravity of those sacrifices, not just on others, but on himself as well. Despite all his success, despite the technological breakthroughs and the companies that had changed industries, Elon wondered, was it worth it? He turned to the small glass window in his office, looking out over the sprawling city below. The buildings, the streets, the cars, it was all so familiar. And yet, there was an overwhelming sense of detachment. It felt like he was looking at a world he had helped shape but could no longer fully participate in. The sounds of his office, the humming of computers, the quiet conversations of his team were all so distant now. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a limbo where everything seemed uncertain. The trial had taken everything from him. His peace of mind, his focus, his sense of control. He had given everything to Tesla, to SpaceX, to the future of humanity. But now, standing at the crossroads of his career and his personal life, he had to ask, what if all of this, everything he had worked so hard for, had come at the expense of his own soul? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Now was not the time for doubt. The jury would reach a verdict, and whatever happened, it would be a turning point. He had to be ready, no matter the outcome. If the verdict was favorable, then it would be another win in a long series of wins. But if it wasn't, well, he would deal with that too. He always had. As the days passed, Elon remained focused on the bigger picture. Tesla's plans for the next phase of production, SpaceX's upcoming missions, and the electric future he was determined to bring to life. They all demanded his attention. But deep down, he knew he couldn't outrun the trial forever. It was still there, lingering in the back of his mind, affecting everything he did. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. He glanced down at the screen. It was a message from David Hall. We've just received word. The jury's reached a verdict. We're on standby for the official announcement. Elon's heart skipped a beat. The moment he had been dreading, or perhaps hoping for, was finally here. He stood up, pacing the room, the weight of the decision looming large. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, was about to be judged in an instant. Minutes passed like hours. Every second felt like an eternity. His mind raced, replaying the entire trial. The opening statements, the testimony, his own closing argument. Had it been enough? He had been as honest as he could be, but would that honesty be enough to save him? The door to his office opened, and David stepped in, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them was palpable. David? Elon asked, his voice almost a whisper. David gave a small nod, and then, with a solemn expression, said, "It's time." The two men walked out of the office and into the hallway, where the rest of the legal team was waiting. There was no need for words now. The trial was over. The waiting was done. They made their way to the courtroom, where a small crowd had gathered, journalists, employees, and onlookers. Elon's gaze swept over the room, taking in the familiar faces. The energy in the air was thick with anticipation. This was it, the final act. As he entered the courtroom, his heart pounded in his chest. The jury was seated, and the judge was already preparing to deliver the verdict. The courtroom went quiet as Elon and his team took their places. The judge's gavel struck the wood, signaling that the moment of truth had arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge began, her voice calm but firm. "The jury has reached a verdict in the case of Elon Musk. We will now hear the decision." Elon's stomach tightened as the room held its breath. The air felt like it was vibrating with the collective weight of everyone's expectations. The jury foreperson stood up, holding the verdict in her hand. She cleared her throat and looked at Elon. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Elon felt as though time had stopped. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of his heartbeat thumping in his ears. "We, the jury," the foreperson began, "find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty on all charges." For a split second, the words didn't register. Elon blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. His mind scrambled to make sense of what had just been said. Not guilty? All charges? The relief hit him like a wave, first slow, then fast, crashing over him in an overwhelming rush. A surge of emotion flooded through him, something raw and real. He was free. Free from the trial, from the fear, from the weight of everything that had been hanging over him for so long. He had won. He had been vindicated. The room erupted in a mix of applause and murmurs. David Hall was the first to reach him, his hand firmly on Elon's shoulder. "You did it," David said, a grin breaking through his usually composed demeanor. "You did it." Elon's lips parted, but for a moment, he couldn't find the words. He looked around at his team, at the people who had believed in him, who had fought for him. And then, at last, he spoke. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The weight of the not guilty verdict hung over Elon Musk, but in the best way possible. It was the relief of knowing he had survived, that his dreams and ambitions would continue unchallenged. Yet, as he walked out of the courtroom with his legal team, there was an unexpected heaviness in his chest. The victory was sweet, but it didn't come without its own complexities. Elon had been in this world of high stakes, colossal risks, and public scrutiny for so long that it had become second nature. He had learned to live with the pressure, to thrive under it, but something about this trial had changed him. Perhaps it was the moment when he had laid his soul bare on the stand, or maybe it was the harsh reality of the personal costs. He wasn't entirely sure, but a shift had occurred, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what the future held. As he emerged from the courthouse, the air outside felt different. The usual hum of the city was there. Traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant whir of electric cars zipping past. But today, it was all background noise to the buzzing thoughts in his head. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was headed or what he should do next. The future of Tesla, SpaceX, and all his ventures loomed over him, but the personal battle he had just fought felt more significant. For the first time in years, Elon wasn't thinking about Mars or electric vehicles. He wasn't plotting his next innovation or thinking about the next groundbreaking announcement. His mind wandered back to simpler things. Family, relationships, the sacrifices he had made. His team had been a constant source of support, especially during the trial. He glanced at David Hall and his other attorneys as they walked beside him. Their smiles were wide, genuine, but Elon could sense their exhaustion. They'd all been through this together, enduring long hours, constant pressure, and public scrutiny. Where to now? David asked as they reached the sleek black car waiting for Elon. The question was almost rhetorical, but Elon knew what he needed to do next. "I'm going to take a few days off," Elon replied. "I need time to think." David raised an eyebrow. "Think about what?" Elon paused, considering the question. The truth was, he didn't have a clear answer. But he knew that after everything that had happened, he couldn't simply return to the relentless grind. There was too much to process, too much to reconsider. The victory, while sweet, didn't feel like the end of a journey. If anything, it felt like the beginning of something new. "Just think," Elon said softly. I need some space. David nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind his words. We'll handle things on this end. Take all the time you need. As the car doors shut and the vehicle pulled away from the courthouse, Elon sank into the plush leather seat. His eyes scanned the city skyline as it passed by, a blur of glass, steel, and ambition. But for the first time in a long while, he felt disconnected from it all. He thought about the people who had been with him through the thick and thin. The ones who had built Tesla from the ground up, the ones who had believed in SpaceX's mission when it seemed impossible. He thought about the countless hours he had spent at the drawing board, in meetings, and on calls. There was no shortage of work or ideas, but there was something missing. Maybe it was balance. Maybe it was time for something more than just the next big thing. When the car finally reached his private residence, Elon stepped out and took a deep breath. The familiar sight of his home was comforting, but even here, in the sanctuary he had created, the stillness felt a little unsettling. The first few days after the trial were filled with nothing but quiet reflection. Elon spent time with his children, rediscovering the joy of just being present. He walked through the sprawling grounds of his property, his mind quieting as he immersed himself in the natural world around him. The weight of the trial and the tension of the courtroom were slowly slipping away, replaced by a more profound sense of clarity. But it wasn't all peaceful. The pressure was still there, nagging at the edges of his mind. The future of Tesla and SpaceX couldn't be ignored for long. He needed to return to work, but not in the way he had before. This time, he was determined to approach things differently. On the fourth day of his retreat, Elon returned to his office. It was a quiet morning, and he hadn't told anyone he was coming back. He sat at his desk, looking out over the city, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to think about something other than work. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, who had been instrumental in the company's rise to prominence. Elon, just wanted to check in. We're moving forward with the Mars mission plans, and things are looking great. But I wanted to hear from you. What do you think? Where should we focus next? Elon's fingers hovered over the phone screen as he considered her question. His mind immediately began racing. Mars, the moon, autonomous vehicles, solar power. It was all there, waiting for him. But he didn't feel the same urgency he once had. Instead, something else bubbled to the surface, something that had always been in the back of his mind but had never taken center stage. Sustainability. Not just for the planet, but for the people around him. Sustainability in relationships, in balance, in life itself. The following week, he made a decision. Let's start a new initiative, he told Gwynne Shotwell when they spoke again. Something that focuses on the human side of our companies, not just the technology. We've done enough with tech. Now it's time to do something that helps people in a more fundamental way. Gwynne, always a pragmatic and visionary leader, seemed to understand immediately. You're thinking about people, aren't you? She asked. The ones who aren't just waiting for the next big product, but are actually living with the technology every day. Elon nodded. Exactly. We've got electric cars, and they're great, but how do we make sure we're not just selling products? How do we make sure we're creating a future that's good for everyone? It was a conversation that would lead to the birth of something unexpected, a new vision that Elon hadn't originally considered, but that, in many ways, was the logical next step. Instead of focusing purely on space colonization or electric vehicles, Elon began to think about the infrastructure of the future, one that didn't just look toward the stars but also cared for the Earth, the people, and the communities who lived on it. Elon took a few more days to gather his thoughts, stepping away from the usual chaos of meetings and product launches. This time, he wanted to dive deep into what sustainability meant, not just from an environmental perspective, but from a social and economic one as well. What did a truly sustainable future look like, and how could his companies, his ideas, and his teams be a part of it? After much contemplation, he decided to host a small summit with the top minds from both Tesla and SpaceX, as well as from other industries. He invited engineers, designers, economists, philosophers, and even social scientists, all with one goal in mind: to start a new conversation about what it would take to build a future that was both technologically advanced and deeply human. The summit took place a month later at a retreat in the hills just outside of Los Angeles. The venue was a minimalist space designed for inspiration. Open floors, natural lighting, and panoramic windows that offered sweeping views of the mountains and ocean beyond. It was the perfect backdrop for the kind of visionary brainstorming Elon had in mind. He set the phone down and walked to the large windows overlooking the city below. The skyline was bathed in the soft light of the afternoon sun. It was beautiful, and for the first time in ages, Elon allowed himself to just be in the moment. He wasn't sure what his next move would be, but whatever it was, he knew it had to be different. The battle in the courtroom had been a turning point, but it wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about finding purpose beyond the work, about rediscovering the things that mattered most, the things he had pushed aside for far too long. With a sense of calm resolve, Elon Musk turned back to his desk and composed a message to Gwen. Let's focus on the mission, but let's also focus on people, on creating a sustainable future for all of us, not just the tech. I'm going to need your help in making that happen. He pressed send, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. The road ahead would be long, but now, at least, he knew the direction to head in. It was a new dawn, a chance to reset, rethink, and rebuild, not just his companies, but his life. And this time, it would be different. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? In the days following his quiet return to work, Elon Musk found himself constantly reflecting on his past decisions. He had spent so much of his life chasing the future, building rockets, designing electric cars, and dreaming of a multi-planetary existence for humanity, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to truly live in the present. The courtroom battle had opened a door to self-reflection, and for the first time in a long time, he was starting to see things differently. Sitting at his desk, Elon skimmed through the latest progress reports from Tesla and SpaceX. Tesla's production was scaling, electric vehicle adoption was increasing, and SpaceX was edging closer to its Mars mission. On paper, everything was on track, but there was something missing. It wasn't the technology or the achievements that troubled him. It was the realization that in the pursuit of greatness, he had left behind something more vital: connection. He had spent years laser-focused on pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But in doing so, he had distanced himself from the people who mattered most, the people who had been with him from the very beginning. The trial had been a stark reminder of that, as the personal sacrifices he had made became painfully clear. And now, as he sat in his office surrounded by charts and blueprints, Elon couldn't help but feel that something had to change. When the group gathered, there was an air of curiosity and excitement. Everyone in the room had heard Elon's call to rethink what the future could be. The session began with Elon's opening statement. I've spent the last few months thinking about the future, not just about what we can build, but about how we build it, he began, his tone steady and reflective. I believe we can solve some of humanity's biggest problems: energy, transportation, space exploration, but we must do it in a way that truly makes life better for everyone, not just for the fortunate few. He paused, looking around the room at the eager faces. It's time we shift our focus from simply creating better technology to creating better lives. We need to think about sustainability in its broadest form: economically, socially, and environmentally. And most importantly, we need to make sure that our innovations don't just serve the elite but benefit everyone. There was a murmur of agreement from the group. Many of them had been part of Elon's previous ventures, and they understood the challenges of moving from one groundbreaking idea to the next. But this new direction was different. This was not about building the next rocket to Mars or perfecting the next electric car. This was about creating a future that worked for humanity at large. Over the next few days, the group engaged in deep discussions about sustainable living, equitable access to technology, and the importance of social and environmental responsibility. They debated concepts of universal basic income, renewable energy solutions for underserved communities, and how to design cities that could thrive in the face of climate change. Elon was fascinated by the new perspectives and ideas that were being presented. For the first time, he felt like the conversation had shifted from technology for technology's sake to a more holistic view of progress. By the end of the summit, a rough framework for the new initiative began to take shape. It would focus on three main pillars: environmental sustainability, social equity, and technological accessibility. The goal wasn't to push for more products or more competition. Instead, it was about building a network of solutions that would empower individuals and communities, helping them build better futures through access to clean energy, efficient transportation, and the tools for learning and development. Elon felt reinvigorated. The summit had sparked something in him, a renewed sense of purpose that didn't just rely on achieving monumental breakthroughs, but also on making a lasting impact on the world as a whole. The success of Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures was no longer enough. He now wanted to build a future that was truly sustainable, not just technologically, but socially, emotionally, and economically. The initiative would become known as Project Unity, a bold vision to create a more equitable and sustainable future for all. Elon Musk, the man who had once been driven purely by the desire to conquer space, now had a new mission: to ensure that humanity's progress didn't leave anyone behind. The first steps were already being taken. Tesla would focus not just on building electric vehicles for the wealthy, but also on developing affordable, scalable energy solutions for lower-income communities. SpaceX would explore ways to use space-based technology to improve life on Earth, be it through satellite internet, climate monitoring, or advancing new energy technologies. And across all of his companies, Elon would push for a more diverse and inclusive workforce, one that could help shape this new vision. Project Unity would take years to develop, but Elon was no longer in a rush. He had learned that the most important part of innovation wasn't simply about speed, it was about impact. And for the first time, he wasn't just thinking about the next big product. He was thinking about the future, the long-term vision, and how to build something that could truly change the world. For Elon Musk, a new dawn had arrived, one that was not just about the stars, but about the people, the planet, and the potential to build a better future for everyone. As the months passed, Project Unity began to take shape in the public eye. For Elon, it was both an exciting and humbling experience. What had started as a simple idea during a retreat had now become a global movement, one that promised not only to change the course of his companies, but to redefine what success meant. The energy surrounding the initiative was palpable. Teams across Tesla, SpaceX, and the other companies under his belt were working on ways to integrate sustainable solutions and make them accessible to all. Tesla's energy products, such as solar panels and Powerwall batteries, were being designed to be more affordable, allowing families in underprivileged areas to benefit from renewable energy. SpaceX had initiated the deployment of low-cost satellites to provide global internet access to remote regions, a step toward bridging the digital divide that Elon had long seen as a necessary part of his broader vision. Despite all the excitement, there was one critical piece of the puzzle that Elon knew he still needed to address: the fractured relationships in his personal life. It had been years since he had truly been present for the people who had once stood by his side, and although his work was his passion, he was beginning to recognize the deep toll his obsession had taken on his family and friends. One of the hardest realizations came when he sat down for a meeting with his ex-wife, Tallulah Riley, who had been a vital support system during the early years of his ventures. The two of them had parted ways amicably after their second marriage ended, but Elon knew there were things left unsaid. There was unfinished business, emotional connections that he had neglected. Sitting across from her in a quiet, upscale cafe in Los Angeles, Elon felt a weight on his shoulders. The conversation had started innocuously, catching up on life since their divorce, but it quickly turned deeper. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Elon began, his voice quieter than usual, "about everything. My work, the kids, our relationship. I realize that I've spent so much time building things that I didn't notice what was being broken along the way." Tallulah, always insightful and compassionate, looked at him thoughtfully. "You don't need to explain, Elon," she said softly. "I think we both know how driven you are. You've always been that way. But you can't keep pouring from an empty cup." Her words hit him harder than he expected. "I know," he replied, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "But it's more than just that. It's like I've been chasing something for so long that I forgot to check if what I was chasing was even worth it in the end." She smiled warmly, her eyes softening. "It's never too late to fix things, Elon. People don't just care about the work you do. They care about you. You've got the power to change not just the world, but the people in it. Elon looked at her, grateful for her insight. Thank you, Tallulah, he said, a sincere gratitude in his voice. You've always been there for me. I need to start rebuilding bridges, starting with my family. Their conversation wasn't just a moment of catharsis. It marked the beginning of a shift in Elon's approach to relationships. He started reaching out to those he had grown distant from, attempting to reconnect not just with his children, but with old friends and colleagues. He knew that no matter how great his achievements were, they wouldn't matter if the people he cared about weren't in his life to share in the victories. His first step was to sit down with his eldest son, Xavier. Elon had often been consumed by his work, and their relationship had suffered because of it. They spent years apart, both physically and emotionally, and now, he wanted to make it right. Elon invited Xavier to a weekend retreat at one of his private properties in California. It was a peaceful environment, far from the distractions of work, and Elon hoped it would be the perfect place to start rebuilding their relationship. When Xavier arrived, there was a palpable awkwardness in the air. Neither father nor son knew exactly how to begin. They had always shared an intellectual bond, but over the years, that connection had faded in the face of Elon's unyielding drive. But this weekend, that was going to change. After a few hours of settling in, Elon suggested they take a walk through the vast grounds. As they strolled in silence, Elon noticed the same thoughtful expression on Xavier's face that he himself often wore. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply two people who had become strangers finding their way back to each other. Finally, Elon broke the silence. I've been thinking a lot about us, Xavier. About how I've been so focused on what I'm building. I've neglected what's really important. I've failed to be there for you when you needed me, and I'm sorry for that. Xavier didn't immediately respond, but after a long pause, he nodded. I get it, Dad. You've been busy, but it didn't make it any easier. I've had to figure out a lot of things on my own. Elon felt the sting of those words, but they were the truth. His son was a young adult now, and he had spent much of his life growing up without the kind of father-son relationship that Elon had always imagined having. You're right, Elon admitted, and I'm not proud of that. But I want to change that, Xavier. I want to be there for you more, to be the father you deserve. Xavier looked up at him then, the ice between them beginning to thaw. I know you're trying, Dad, he said quietly. Maybe we can start by just being around more. Maybe we don't have to fix everything all at once, but we can take it one step at a time. Elon smiled, a sense of relief flooding through him. It was going to be a long road to rebuild those relationships, but this moment felt like a start. As the weekend drew to a close, Elon felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the successful ventures or the innovations that gave him satisfaction now. It was the chance to reconnect with those who had been there from the start, the people who had witnessed his ups and downs and who still loved him regardless. The journey ahead was going to be tough. There were more bridges to rebuild, more relationships to mend. But for the first time in a long time, Elon was ready to face it all, not as a tech mogul on a quest to change the world, but as a father, a friend, and a person who was finally learning what it meant to truly live. With each passing day, Elon Musk felt a subtle shift in his mindset, a growing realization that his journey wasn't just about shaping the future of technology or achieving unprecedented business success. It was about leaving a legacy that transcended the products, companies, and even the lofty goals he had set for humanity. More than ever, it was about the people who would inherit the world he was working so tirelessly to change. The time spent reconnecting with Xavier and Tallulah had sparked something deep within him. His vision was expanding. He began to see the enormous power of human connection, and he started considering how his innovations could not only advance technology but also foster stronger communities, more meaningful relationships, and a more sustainable world. One evening, as he sat in his office overlooking the city skyline, Elon found himself thinking about his own childhood. He had always been driven by a sense of purpose, but as a young boy, he had been endlessly fascinated with the world of science fiction, the idea of space exploration, and the endless possibilities that could lie beyond Earth. That childhood curiosity had ignited the fire that had led him to pursue ventures like SpaceX and Tesla. But now, that same curiosity had evolved. He wasn't just concerned with exploring space. He was concerned with the people who would populate it and the society they would create. He found himself revisiting a conversation he had had with Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, just a few days earlier. They had discussed not just the logistics of getting to Mars, but the ethics of building a new civilization on a new planet. If humanity were to colonize Mars, how could they ensure that the mistakes of Earth weren't repeated? How could they avoid the same social, economic, and environmental pitfalls? The discussion had been intense and thoughtful, and Elon was now more certain than ever that his approach to innovation needed to be holistic. It wasn't enough to solve technological problems. He had to address the human side of progress as well. He stood up and walked to his desk, opening his laptop. He began drafting a mission statement for his newly envisioned venture. This wouldn't just be another project or company. This was his legacy, the intersection of technology, sustainability, and human connection. The mission was clear: to build a future where humanity could thrive, both on Earth and beyond, but with deep care for the planet, the people, and the communities that made it all possible. Project Humanity was born. It was more than just a name. It was a commitment to a future where technology and progress didn't come at the cost of human connection, environmental destruction, or social inequality. Elon had seen firsthand how divisive and destructive unchecked innovation could be. He had seen how his own work had sometimes prioritized speed over care, profit over people. Now, he was determined to create something different, a movement that would weave together the best of human ingenuity and empathy. The first part of Project Humanity was rooted in the concept of sustainable cities. Elon knew that the future of both Earth and any future colonies would depend on how people lived and interacted with their environment. He reached out to experts in architecture, urban planning, and environmental science to create a blueprint for cities that were not only technologically advanced but also designed to be harmonious with nature. SpaceX's advances in space travel could be mirrored on Earth. Clean energy would power these new cities, with buildings designed to harness solar power, advanced waste recycling systems, and eco-friendly transportation. The goal wasn't just to create efficient, high-tech cities, it was to create a model for the rest of the world to follow, showing that progress and sustainability didn't have to be at odds. Meanwhile, Tesla's role in Project Humanity would go beyond electric vehicles. The company's energy division would lead the charge in making solar energy more affordable and accessible to communities across the globe. Elon envisioned a world where every home could be powered by clean energy, regardless of economic status. And with advancements in battery technology, he believed that energy storage solutions could help overcome the limitations of current energy grids, giving remote areas the power they needed to flourish. But it wasn't just about energy, cities, or technology. Elon's vision for Project Humanity encompassed a more profound, human-centered approach to innovation. Education, healthcare, and social equity were key components of his broader plan. He knew that for true progress to occur, it wasn't enough to simply solve problems for the privileged. It had to be for everyone. Elon set up a new initiative within his companies, Humanity Labs. This would be a think tank of sorts, bringing together the brightest minds from various fields, ethics, social science, technology, and policy, to come up with solutions to humanity's most pressing issues. Whether it was addressing income inequality, developing universal healthcare access, or ensuring that advancements in artificial intelligence didn't undermine human dignity, Humanity Labs would serve as the moral compass of all his future endeavors. It wasn't the rockets, or the cars, or the flashy innovations that would define his legacy. It was the lives he touched, the future he helped create, and the humanity he was determined to leave in better hands than when he arrived. And for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk realized that the future wasn't something that would just happen. It was something that could be shaped, nurtured, and built by him, by his companies, and, most importantly, by all of humanity. It was a chilly morning in early spring when Elon Musk stood at the podium before an audience of engineers, environmentalists, policymakers, and activists from around the world. He had just flown in from the latest SpaceX launch, his jet still idling on the runway, but today was not about rockets or Mars. Today was about the future of Earth, and more specifically, the initiative that had come to define not just his business career, but his personal evolution. The auditorium was buzzing with anticipation. Today, Elon would unveil the first major steps of Project Humanity. After months of research, planning, and collaboration, he was ready to share his vision with the world. His presentation had been carefully crafted, blending the technological innovations of his companies with a powerful call to action. A challenge to all of humanity to come together to confront the greatest challenges facing the planet. As he stood there, waiting for the crowd to settle, Elon couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and excitement. This wasn't just a pitch to investors or customers. It was a call for a shift in global thinking, a moment when his work transcended business and entered the realm of social and environmental impact. This was the culmination of everything he had learned, every lesson he had absorbed about technology, relationships, and the future of mankind. Finally, the room fell silent. Elon adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the beginning of something far greater than any single company or product. Today, we come together not just as individuals, but as a collective force. Project Humanity is not about advancing technology for the sake of progress. It is about using that technology to solve the problems that have plagued humanity for centuries. As the months passed, Project Humanity gained traction. More and more people began to understand Elon's vision, not just for technology, but for a world that was fairer, more connected, and more sustainable. His message resonated with people from all walks of life. The tech world embraced it, yes, but so did educators, social activists, and environmentalists. It was a movement that was larger than any single product or company. It was about reimagining the future. For Elon, it was also about forging a deeper connection with his children. They had always been a priority for him, but now, with the birth of Project Humanity, he realized just how much his own vision would impact their generation. They would be the ones who carried this movement forward, who inherited the world he was shaping. And he would be there to guide them, not just as a father, but as someone who had made mistakes, learned, and grown, and who now wanted to leave them with a better world. One afternoon, while walking through the Tesla factory in Fremont, California, Elon received a call from Xavier. The young man had recently started his own tech venture, and Elon was eager to hear how it was going. "I'm doing well, Dad," Xavier said, his voice sounding more confident than it had in years. "I'm building something that I believe can really make a difference, too. It's not as big as Tesla or SpaceX, but it's something that matters." Elon smiled. "I'm proud of you, Xavier. Whatever you're working on, I know it's going to be amazing." Xavier paused. "You know, Dad, I've been thinking, all these years, I've watched you change the world in your own way. But I think your greatest legacy might not be what you build, but what you leave behind for all of us." Elon felt a lump form in his throat. For a moment, he was speechless. His son's words struck a chord in him. Xavier understood. He got it. "I'm trying to build something for everyone, Xavier," Elon finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "Something that lasts. And I want you to be part of it. All of you, your generation, will shape what comes next." As they talked, Elon felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't just chasing an idea anymore. He was creating something real, something that could outlive him, outlive his companies, and truly change the world. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The audience listened intently, waiting for him to continue. "For years, we've been consumed with building things. Technologies that can take us to the stars, cars that don't pollute the air, rockets that make space travel cheaper. But in all of that, we've overlooked one crucial thing. The people who will live on this planet long after we're gone. Our children, our grandchildren, the generations who will inherit what we leave behind." Elon stepped aside, allowing the first slide to appear on the screen behind him. A graphic illustrating the rising global temperatures, the loss of biodiversity, and the increasing wealth disparity. "The science is clear. Our planet is in crisis," he continued. "But rather than being defeated by it, we should see this as an opportunity. An opportunity to rethink how we live, how we work, and how we treat each other. Project Humanity is about creating sustainable cities, designing solutions for affordable, clean energy, and ensuring that we never again prioritize technology over people. It's about combining the best of human ingenuity with the care and empathy needed to build a future where everyone can thrive. The crowd began to nod, murmurs of agreement rippling through the room. But Elon wasn't finished yet. Today, I'm announcing the first steps of Project Humanity. We're not just going to talk about change, we're going to make it happen. Starting today, Tesla is committed to providing free energy solutions to communities in the most impoverished regions of the world. SpaceX will expand its satellite internet program to provide connectivity to rural and underserved areas globally. And with the support of Humanity Labs, we're going to create a roadmap for a new kind of world, one where technology, society, and nature work in harmony. A hush fell over the room. Elon's eyes scanned the audience, feeling the gravity of what he had just proposed. This wasn't just a vision. This was a challenge, and one that would require not just his leadership, but the collective effort of governments, businesses, and individuals. But even as he stood there, knowing how monumental the task was, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Not the business empires, not the accolades or financial success, but the real, lasting impact on the world. As he finished his speech, the audience stood to their feet in applause. There was no doubt that the ideas he presented had struck a chord. This wasn't a speech about space travel or electric cars. It was about building a world where technology could bring people closer instead of dividing them. A world where progress didn't come at the expense of the planet or its people. After the presentation, Elon spent hours answering questions from the press and meeting with key stakeholders who were eager to get involved in Project Humanity. There were discussions with government leaders, NGOs, and international organizations who saw the potential of his vision. Many of them offered their support, eager to collaborate on the ambitious goals he had laid out. But not everyone was convinced. Later that evening, as Elon prepared to leave the venue, he received an unexpected message from a longtime investor and friend, Peter Thiel. Thiel had always been a staunch supporter of Elon's ventures, but his message was blunt. Elon, what you've outlined today is revolutionary, but you're forgetting one thing. Progress isn't just about technology and people. It's about money. You can't change the world unless you change the economics behind it. Who's going to foot the bill for all these grand ideas? How are you going to make sure this doesn't just become another utopian dream? The words stung, but Elon knew they weren't entirely untrue. While his vision was inspiring, the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, economic, political, and social. The changes he wanted to see required massive investments, collaboration between sectors, and an unprecedented level of global coordination. Not to mention, the world had a tendency to resist change, especially when it came to entrenched industries and power structures. The next day, he called an emergency meeting with his leadership team at Tesla, SpaceX, and other companies under his purview. They gathered in a sleek, glass-walled conference room, the hum of innovation in the air. Elon wasted no time with pleasantries. "We're at a tipping point," he began. "What I proposed yesterday wasn't just an idea, it's a call to action. But we can't afford to be naive. We need to think strategically about how we fund this, how we scale it, and how we make it sustainable in the long run. This is bigger than just our companies. It's a movement that requires capital, support, and the commitment of every person who believes in it." He turned to Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, who had always been a pragmatist and a strategic thinker. "Gwynne, I need your help. What's the best way to leverage SpaceX's capabilities to help fund this vision while staying true to our values?" Gwynne nodded, immediately going into problem-solving mode. "We can start by scaling our satellite internet initiative, but we need to establish partnerships with governments, telecoms, and development organizations to get the financial backing we need. We can also explore new funding models, perhaps impact investing, or even creating a new nonprofit that can channel private donations into sustainable projects." That's where the real challenge lay. In his travels to Washington, D.C., Elon met with government officials, pitching his vision for Project Humanity as a way to secure the future of both Earth and space. While many were intrigued, there were those who saw it as a pipe dream. A few even questioned whether it was appropriate for a private citizen to take on such a global task. Elon's answer was simple. "Change doesn't wait for bureaucracy," he said. speaking to a group of influential lawmakers. The world's biggest problems won't be solved by waiting for governments to act. They'll be solved by taking decisive, immediate action. If we want a future where our children can breathe clean air, drink clean water, and live in harmony with nature, we have to start now. His words struck a chord with some of the officials, but others remained doubtful. They raised concerns about the feasibility of the project and the cost of implementing such a vast undertaking. Elon, ever the pragmatist, understood these concerns. But he was determined not to be deterred. He knew that if he could get just a few key figures to support him, it would create a ripple effect, bringing others into the fold. Meanwhile, Gwynn and his finance team were in talks with some of the most prominent venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. The goal was clear: to secure funding that would allow them to begin making real strides toward the ambitious goals of Project Humanity. But some investors, while intrigued by the idea, were hesitant. They had seen the risks associated with Elon's previous ventures, risks that had paid off, but only after years of struggles and setbacks. Now, they were asking themselves, would this be another high-stakes gamble, or would it be a game-changer? Elon's pitch was simple but powerful. Project Humanity wasn't just a corporate venture. It was a social movement. It had the potential to reshape the global economy, make technology more inclusive, and foster a new generation of leaders who understood the importance of balance between progress and sustainability. For the first time, he wasn't just selling products. He was selling a vision of a future that was both technologically advanced and socially responsible. But convincing investors to see it that way wasn't easy. In one particular meeting with a major investment firm, Elon presented his ideas for how the project could eventually be profitable, not just through products like clean energy solutions, electric vehicles, and satellite internet, but through the broader economic impact of sustainable cities and new industries that would emerge as a result of Project Humanity. He showed them projections, models, and data that demonstrated how sustainability and profitability could go hand in hand. Yet, despite the compelling case, there was resistance. One of the investors, a seasoned venture capitalist with decades of experience, raised a pointed question. Elon's mind raced as he processed her suggestions. This wasn't just a matter of big ideas. It was about finding new ways to finance them, without compromising the core values of the project. As the meeting continued, it became clear to Elon that the path forward would be far from easy. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of clarity. Project Humanity was a long-term endeavor. It would take years, possibly decades, to fully realize. But it was a fight worth fighting. The tipping point had arrived. And despite the obstacles, Elon knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop now. This was just the beginning. Elon sat in his office late that evening, gazing out the window at the dark sky. The city lights twinkled below, a reminder of how much humanity had already achieved, but also of how much further they had to go. The weight of Project Humanity, now that it had gained significant attention, was starting to settle in. The road ahead wasn't just about innovation. It was about navigating the complex world of global politics, corporate interests, and public perception. The backlash had begun, and it came from all sides. Some politicians viewed his vision with skepticism, unwilling to embrace such an ambitious undertaking without seeing a clear path to profitability. Environmental activists, though they supported the idea of sustainability, questioned whether a tech billionaire could truly be trusted with such a monumental task. And the corporate world, unsurprisingly, was wary of the changes Elon was suggesting. After all, his vision threatened established industries that had been entrenched for decades. But Elon was no stranger to opposition. In fact, it was something he had encountered at every step of his career, whether it was with the launch of Tesla or the development of reusable rockets. He had learned that resistance was often a sign that he was on the right track. Now, however, the stakes were higher. Project Humanity wasn't just about launching the next big product. It was about reshaping the very foundations of how humanity interacted with technology, society, and the environment. The next few weeks would be crucial. Elon knew that if he was going to get the support needed to make Project Humanity a reality, he would have to forge alliances, navigate complex negotiations, and bring together diverse stakeholders with very different agendas. And it all began with securing funding. Gwynne Shotwell and the rest of his leadership team at SpaceX and Tesla had been working tirelessly to come up with ways to generate the necessary resources. They had brainstormed new models for public-private partnerships and even discussed the possibility of launching a global crowdfunding campaign for Project Humanity's initiatives. But none of it would matter unless they had the backing of major investors who didn't just care about the financial return, but who also believed in the cause. Elon's determination was unwavering, but as the months passed, it became clear that even his singular focus and unrelenting drive couldn't force Project Humanity into fruition without facing substantial obstacles. The pushback wasn't just ideological. It was personal, financial, and, at times, downright antagonistic. Skepticism from both investors and governments had started to turn into open resistance. It was at this critical juncture that a new figure entered the scene. Someone Elon hadn't anticipated, but who would prove to be an unexpected ally. It all began with a phone call late one evening. Elon had just returned from a trip to Asia, where he had tried to negotiate with several global leaders to secure funding and political support. The talks had been tense, with many leaders hesitant to commit to a global initiative that could require long-term financial and infrastructural investments. Feeling exhausted and frustrated, he had finally given up on the idea of sleeping that night, instead opting to catch up on emails and plans. The phone rang, cutting through the silence of his office. It was a number he didn't recognize, but the area code immediately grabbed his attention. It was a Washington, D.C. number. "Hello?" Elon answered, unsure of who would be calling this late. "Elon," a familiar voice said, "it's Obama." Elon sat up straight, his exhaustion suddenly forgotten. Barack Obama, the former president and one of the most influential figures in global politics, was on the other end of the line. "I know this is unexpected," Obama continued, "but I've been following your Project Humanity closely. And I have to say, I'm intrigued. In fact, I think what you're trying to do could be the most important global initiative of our generation. But you're going to need more than just great ideas and technology to pull it off." Elon's mind raced. He had always admired Obama for his leadership and vision, but to have the former president of the United States reach out to him personally was something he never expected. "I agree," Elon replied. "I've been running into a lot of resistance, especially when it comes to funding. And it's not just the money. It's convincing governments, corporations, and the public that this is a necessary step for our future. That's why I'm pushing so hard. But I'm starting to wonder if I'm fighting an uphill battle." "Elon, we've seen this before. We've seen you create incredible things, and we've watched you take huge risks. But this feels different. This feels like a crusade, not a business. What happens if you can't make it profitable? What happens if the world isn't ready for this kind of change?" Elon didn't flinch. "I don't believe in if. I believe in when. The world will be ready. It's not just about making money. It's about making a difference. The world is on the brink of collapse in so many areas: climate change, inequality, access to technology. If we don't start taking bold steps now, we may not get another chance. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do something that will matter long after we're gone." The room fell silent for a moment. Elon's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. It was clear that while some of the investors were still unsure, there were others who had heard the conviction in his voice. It wasn't about selling a product. It was about offering the world a vision that could change everything. By the end of the meeting, they had secured a few tentative commitments from investors who were willing to come on board, albeit cautiously. It wasn't the overwhelming support Elon had hoped for, but it was a start. Every journey began with a single step. As the weeks passed, Elon continued to push forward. He traveled to Europe to meet with leaders of international organizations who had expressed interest in collaborating on Project Humanity. He met with philanthropists and CEOs, aligning his vision with theirs. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. But the challenges were far from over. Resistance continued to rise, and the pressure to prove that this ambitious project could succeed was mounting. Yet, despite the skepticism and opposition, Elon felt more certain than ever that he was on the right path. In the quiet moments before he slept, he thought about Xavier and Tallulah. He thought about the legacy he wanted to leave them, not just as a father, but as someone who had dared to believe in something greater than himself, something that could change the course of history. Elon knew that there would be setbacks, obstacles, and difficult decisions ahead. But he also knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just another business venture. This was his chance to shape the future of humanity, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in his way. The road ahead would be long and filled with uncertainty, but Elon Musk had never been one to shy away from a challenge. He was ready for whatever came next. Obama chuckled softly, the sound reassuring in the late-night quiet. "Welcome to the club. But listen, I think I might be able to help. I'm not talking about just lending my name, Elon. I'm talking about organizing a real coalition of leaders, former presidents, global philanthropists, and even some of the more influential voices in the business world. You need political backing, not just from DC, but from all corners of the globe. If you want to make this happen, it can't just be about technology. You need to shape a movement that has the political and social weight to change things." Elon leaned back in his chair, absorbing the gravity of what Obama was offering. This wasn't just a token endorsement. Obama was proposing to become a central figure in Project Humanity, using his network and influence to rally support at a level Elon had only dreamed of. "I didn't expect a call like this, Mr. President," Elon said, his voice full of gratitude. "But you're right. I need more than just my companies to make this work. I need the power of a movement, and I need voices that can sway both public opinion and political will. I would be honored to work with you on this." The line went quiet for a moment, and then Obama spoke again. "Let's be clear, Elon. This won't be easy. But you've already made the first move by creating something that people can believe in. Now it's time to take that belief and turn it into something more tangible. A movement, like I said, and I can help you build it." Over the next few weeks, the two men worked together, strategizing the next phase of Project Humanity. Obama used his political connections and global standing to start building a coalition of influential figures who would become the face of the movement. It wasn't just about raising money. It was about building the kind of political will that could influence major global policy changes. They also began drafting a series of speeches, events, and media campaigns designed to ignite public support for the project. One of the first big moves was to announce a series of global town hall meetings, where world leaders, environmentalists, scientists, and entrepreneurs would come together to discuss solutions for climate change, sustainable development, and global inequality, issues that had long been central to Project Humanity's mission. These meetings would be the platform from which Obama, Elon, and their allies would call for immediate action and present concrete steps for the future. While many of these steps were still in the planning stages, the momentum was beginning to build. With Obama's involvement, a new sense of legitimacy and urgency had been injected into the project. But even as the political front began to shift in favor of the initiative, there were still plenty of people who weren't convinced, or who actively sought to discredit it. One of the biggest challenges was a rising tide of corporate skepticism. Major oil companies, large utility companies, and even some influential tech giants saw Project Humanity as a direct threat to their business models. Elon knew that it wouldn't be easy to win them over, but he was determined to push forward. The economic arguments he had made during his meetings with investors now had to be backed up with real, undeniable facts. His strategy was to show that the transition to a more sustainable world wasn't just about protecting the planet. It was about creating an entirely new economy, one that was built around clean energy, smart cities, and equitable access to technology. However, not all of the critics were corporate. Some environmental groups, while supportive of Elon's broad vision, criticized him for being too focused on technology-driven solutions, rather than addressing the root causes of environmental degradation. These critics believed that Project Humanity, while admirable in its scope, didn't go far enough in challenging the capitalist systems that they felt were at the core of global inequality and environmental destruction. In one particularly heated meeting with a coalition of environmental groups, Elon was challenged on his approach. A passionate advocate for systemic change stood up and said, "You talk about saving the planet with electric cars and space travel, but you're still playing within a system that's fundamentally flawed. You can't just invent new tech and hope that will fix everything. You have to change the entire structure of how we live, how we produce, and how we consume. And you need to confront the economic forces that profit from destruction not just tweak the system around the edges. Elon listened carefully, understanding the frustration. He had spent years grappling with similar questions, and though he believed in the potential of technology, he knew that it could never be the sole solution. "I hear you," he said thoughtfully. "I agree that the system needs to change, but change won't come without collaboration. We can't just throw out everything and start over. We need to innovate within the system, challenge the status quo, and build the kind of world we want to see, step by step." That's what Project Humanity is all about. The tension in the room was palpable, but slowly, the group began to warm to the idea that Elon was offering an evolution, not a revolution. A movement that could bring together people from all walks of life, different sectors, and industries, all working toward a common goal. As the weeks turned into months, the coalition grew stronger. With Obama at his side, Elon's message was reaching more and more people. The media coverage was increasing, and it seemed that the idea of Project Humanity was starting to become not just a possibility, but an inevitability. Despite the challenges, Elon knew one thing for sure: the project was gaining traction. And with each passing day, it was becoming clearer that the movement he had started was on the verge of changing the world forever. But even as progress was made, new and even more formidable challenges were on the horizon. Ones that would test his leadership, resolve, and the very foundations of Project Humanity. The battle was far from over. As the momentum for Project Humanity continued to build, so did the complexities of the alliance that Elon had forged with Barack Obama. While the former president's support had proven invaluable in rallying political and public support, the realities of their partnership were becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Both men were used to taking charge, but now, they were faced with the challenge of leading a global movement that required collaboration with countless stakeholders, each with their own agendas, priorities, and demands. Despite these difficulties, Elon couldn't afford to back down. Obama had always been the embodiment of hope and change, but the question now was, could they make this work, together? Would their combined vision be enough to overcome the forces of corporate resistance, government gridlock, and public skepticism? The stakes had never been higher. The first sign that things might not be as simple as they had hoped came during a high-profile summit in New York, designed to bring together world leaders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders to discuss the future of sustainability and global development. Elon had been looking forward to this summit for weeks, knowing that the participation of key global figures would lend a sense of gravitas to Project Humanity. But when the summit began, it became clear that the room was filled with people who weren't just there to support the project, they were there to challenge it. One of the first speakers to take the stage was a prominent CEO from one of the world's largest multinational corporations, a company that had a long history of working in the oil and gas industry. The CEO, who had come to the event with a reputation for championing corporate sustainability, immediately launched into an attack on the very concept of Project Humanity. "While I appreciate the ambition behind Mr. Musk's project," the CEO began, "I'm afraid it is unrealistic to believe that we can transition away from fossil fuels on the scale that's being proposed. Our global infrastructure is too dependent on oil and gas, and the idea that technology alone can solve this crisis is naive. What we need is more pragmatic, market-driven solutions that take into account the economic realities of today's world." The room murmured in agreement, and Elon felt his stomach tighten. He had expected pushback, but the intensity of the CEO's rhetoric made it clear that this was not just a simple disagreement. It was an ideological battle. Elon stood up, preparing to respond. As he took the stage, he could feel the weight of all the eyes in the room on him, and he knew that this moment would define not just the summit, but perhaps the future of Project Humanity itself. "Let me address this head-on," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "We've heard this argument before. It's the argument that the world isn't ready for change. It's the argument that we should stay on the same path, even as that path leads us toward environmental collapse. But here's the truth. If we don't take bold, decisive action, we won't have a planet left to talk about in a few decades." The room went silent. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Elon continued, "The status quo is no longer an option. We are facing a global crisis, one that will have far-reaching consequences for our children, our economies, and our way of life. Project Humanity is about reimagining the way we live, work, and interact with the world. It's about taking responsibility for our future and embracing the potential of technology to help us get there. And yes, that means challenging entrenched systems and industries that have been resistant to change. But it also means creating a future where innovation and sustainability go hand in hand. His words struck a chord with some in the room, and for a moment, it seemed like the CEO's challenge might have been defused. But then another voice from the crowd spoke up, this time from a well-known environmental activist. "This will take time," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "But I'm in this for the long haul. We'll get there. We have to." Obama nodded. "Let's make sure we keep pushing forward, even when it gets tough. We've got one shot at this." And with that, the two men set their sights on the long road ahead, knowing that the real work was just beginning. There would be setbacks, betrayals, and challenges. But they had one thing on their side: the conviction that the future of humanity depended on what they were trying to accomplish. The battle for a better world had only just begun. As the weeks went by, Elon Musk's resolve was tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. Despite the increasing political support and the growing coalition behind Project Humanity, a new, unexpected wave of challenges was beginning to unravel the fragile alliance that had been so carefully constructed. The initial excitement had worn off, and now, the hard work of turning ambition into reality was revealing the darker, more complicated sides of global politics, corporate interests, and human nature. The global summit in New York had been a defining moment, but it had also exposed the cracks that existed between the various factions supporting the project. While some corporate leaders had been swayed by Elon's passion, others saw Project Humanity as a direct threat to their established interests. Environmental groups, while agreeing on the overarching goal of sustainability, began to criticize Elon's focus on technology-driven solutions. Some were starting to question whether his plan for a sustainable future truly addressed the social and economic inequalities that had created many of the crises he was trying to solve. Elon had been prepared for resistance, but he wasn't prepared for how deeply entrenched the skepticism was. The media, which had once hailed him as a visionary, began to turn against him. Investigative reports questioned the feasibility of his grand ideas, claiming that they were little more than lofty dreams unsupported by sound economic reasoning. The backlash was growing, and it seemed like every time Elon took one step forward, he was pushed 2 steps back. The breaking point came one cold evening in late winter. Elon was sitting in his office at SpaceX, poring over reports that seemed to get more discouraging by the day. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Obama. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Elon felt a tight knot in his stomach. He had been expecting a call from the former president, but he had no idea what the urgency was about. He dialed Obama's number, and after a few rings, the former president answered. "I hear you, Elon," the activist said, "but there's something you're missing. You talk about technology solving the problems we face, but you're ignoring the fact that the root causes of these problems are deeply embedded in our economic system. You can't just create a green world while leaving the rest of the system intact. You need to challenge the very structures of power that are perpetuating inequality and environmental destruction. Technology alone won't save us. It has to be part of a larger, more systemic change." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Elon paused, taking in the challenge. He had always known that technology alone wouldn't fix everything, but hearing it voiced so clearly in a room full of people made him realize just how deep the divide was between his vision and the reality that many others saw. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "I understand that we need more than just technology. We need a systemic shift, a new way of thinking about our economy, our environment, and our society. Project Humanity isn't just about creating new technologies. It's about building a new world, a world that's sustainable, equitable, and just. But that world won't come from waiting for someone else to make it happen. It will come from bold action, from taking risks, and from doing what others think is impossible." The conversation continued for hours, with debates and discussions erupting all around him. Elon felt the weight of the challenge that lay ahead. Not only did he have to convince the world that Project Humanity was possible, but he had to convince people with vastly different views to come together and support it. As the summit concluded, Elon and Obama met backstage. The two men exchanged glances, both of them fully aware of how complicated things had become. "You handled yourself well out there," Obama said, offering a rare smile. "But this is going to be a lot harder than either of us anticipated." Elon nodded. "I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I can't help but think that we're getting closer to something. These conversations, they're not just about selling an idea anymore. They're about changing hearts and minds. And that takes time." Obama paused, his gaze thoughtful. "And it's going to take more than just your vision. It's going to take an entire movement, one that can unite people across different sectors, different ideologies, and different cultures. We're going to need to build alliances that transcend traditional lines of division." Elon thought about that. He had spent his entire career disrupting industries, challenging the status quo. But this was something different. It wasn't just about building new products or solving engineering problems. It was about rebuilding the very systems that had been in place for centuries. Obama was silent for a moment, clearly mulling over the suggestion. "You're talking about a worldwide campaign, something on a scale we've never seen before. It's going to take a lot of coordination, and it won't be easy. But I think you might be right. The people need to see this vision firsthand. They need to believe that this is something that can change their lives for the better." Elon could feel the adrenaline start to pulse through him as he thought about the logistics. A worldwide campaign wasn't something that could be pulled off overnight, but with the right resources, the right messaging, and the right technology, it could work. It had to. "I'll start working on it," Elon said. "I'll get the teams at SpaceX, Tesla, and all of my other companies involved. I'll reach out to our allies in the tech community. We need to create a movement that's not just about the future, but about today, one that shows people what's possible right now." Obama's voice softened. "I'll help however I can. But just remember, Elon, this is going to be a battle. You're not just fighting against corporations and governments. You're fighting against a deeply entrenched system that doesn't want to change. But if anyone can pull this off, it's you." The call ended, and Elon sat in his office, staring at the blueprints for Project Humanity scattered across his desk. His mind was swirling with ideas, plans, and strategies. The road ahead was going to be long and uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't afford to back down now. It was time to take the fight directly to the people. In the days that followed, Elon and his team worked tirelessly to craft a plan that would shake the world to its core. The idea was simple: create a global, multimedia campaign that would highlight the devastating consequences of climate change and the urgent need for sustainable solutions. But it wouldn't just be about statistics and data. It would focus on real, human stories. People from all walks of life who were already experiencing the effects of a warming planet and who had begun to adopt sustainable technologies in their own lives. Elon knew that the personal, emotional connection was key. People needed to see that Project Humanity wasn't just about saving the planet. It was about saving their future. The campaign would feature a series of global events, showcasing solar-powered communities, electric vehicle fleets, renewable energy innovations, and projects that were already making a difference in the fight against climate change. The goal was to inspire people to take action, not just to sign petitions or donate money, but to change their daily habits, support sustainable companies, and demand that their governments prioritize a green economy. "Hey, Elon," Obama's voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension in it. "We've got a problem. The coalition is starting to crack. People are getting cold feet. Some of the big players are backing out, and we're losing support fast." Elon leaned back in his chair, running his hand through his hair. He had feared this moment, but hearing the words out loud made it all the more real. "Who's backing out?" Elon asked, his voice flat. "Some of the corporate sponsors. Not all, but enough to hurt. The pushback from the oil and gas sector is intensifying, and a few governments are starting to pull their support, citing concerns over the economic impact of Project Humanity. You've got some major environmental groups questioning the direction we're taking. The media is starting to turn as well. It's becoming a feeding frenzy." Elon's mind raced. He had expected opposition, but he had hoped it would come later, when they had more momentum. The situation felt like it was spiraling out of control. "Do you think we can turn this around?" Elon asked, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Obama paused before answering. "We have to. But it's going to take more than just talking about the vision. We need to show people we have a concrete plan, a roadmap that's clear and convincing. Otherwise, we're going to lose everything we've worked for. Elon's mind began to work through possible solutions. He knew that they needed something to reignite the momentum, something bold, something that would recapture the public's imagination and show that Project Humanity wasn't just an abstract concept, but a movement that could deliver tangible results. He had an idea, but it was risky, very risky. What if we take this fight directly to the people? Elon said, his voice steady with determination. What if we bypass the political and corporate interests altogether and create a massive grassroots movement? A real global demonstration of what we're trying to build. One that shows people the power of clean energy, sustainable technology, and a new way of living. But as Elon and his team got to work, they faced more resistance than ever before. The corporate lobbyists began to turn up the heat, and governments that had once been on board with Project Humanity started to distance themselves. Behind the scenes, powerful forces were trying to quash the movement before it could gain any real traction. Elon knew that the battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But with every challenge that came his way, he found himself more determined than ever to push forward. The stakes were too high to give up now. The clock was ticking, and the future of humanity was hanging in the balance. This was no longer just about a project. This was a fight for the future. And Elon Musk was ready to lead the charge. The world seemed to hold its breath as the global campaign for Project Humanity was officially launched. The efforts were nothing short of monumental. From bustling cities in Europe to remote villages in Africa, the initiative began to spread, one story at a time. It wasn't just about Elon Musk and the technology he was pushing. It was about real people, struggling with the consequences of climate change and fighting to rebuild their communities with sustainable solutions. For weeks, media outlets ran story after story about the transformative effects of renewable energy, electric vehicles, and sustainable practices. Governments, too, started to take notice. At first, the response was lukewarm. Many politicians were wary of embracing such a large-scale transformation, particularly given the deep ties they had to the fossil fuel industry. But as public sentiment began to shift, pressure mounted on them to take action. In the heart of Washington, D.C., things were coming to a head. Elon Musk and Barack Obama were about to meet with top senators and world leaders to discuss the future of Project Humanity, but the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. The campaign had garnered significant public support, but the forces against them were just as powerful. Corporate giants with vested interests in fossil fuels were not going to let go of their hold on the global economy without a fight. They had been using their influence to manipulate the political narrative, funding campaigns that smeared Project Humanity as unrealistic, overly ambitious, and a threat to economic stability. Elon could feel the tension in the air as he walked into the meeting room. Obama was already there, speaking quietly with a few key members of Congress. Elon joined him, exchanging a brief nod before they took their seats at the conference table. As the meeting began, the room filled with voices, all speaking at once. The most vocal voices were those of the lobbyists, representing industries that stood to lose the most from Project Humanity's success. The oil and gas sectors were particularly outspoken, as well as large-scale agricultural interests that relied heavily on unsustainable practices. You cannot expect us to dismantle the very industries that power the world overnight, one lobbyist said, his tone sharp. The ramifications on global trade, employment, and national security would be disastrous. Elon leaned forward, his expression unwavering. The status quo is unsustainable. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's here. If we don't act now, the economic damage will be far worse than anything we're proposing. We're talking about long-term survival, not short-term profits. There was a murmur in the room, but it was clear that not everyone was convinced. One senator spoke up, his voice laced with skepticism. You're asking us to make a leap of faith, to put all of our eggs in a basket that may or may not hold up under pressure. What guarantees do we have that Project Humanity will even work? That the technology is ready to scale? Elon's response was immediate, firm. There are no guarantees in life. But I believe that the risk of not acting is far greater. If we don't invest in clean energy, sustainable infrastructure, and technology, We're gambling with the future of our children and our planet. And we're already seeing the consequences of that gamble. The data doesn't lie. The question is not whether we can afford to act. It's whether we can afford not to. Barack Obama, who had been silent until now, spoke up. What Elon is saying is true. We're at a crossroads. We can either continue down the same path and watch our world deteriorate, or we can embrace change, not just for the environment, but for the economy. Think of the new jobs, the industries that will emerge. Think of the global leadership position we could take in the field of clean technology. We have the chance to set the stage for the next era of human progress. As the plans took shape, the public response was immediate. Social media lit up with excitement over the idea of a fully sustainable city built in just a few weeks. People began to rally behind the project, and soon, cities around the world offered their support, pledging resources and volunteers to help make it happen. The live event, dubbed Humanity Now, was set to take place in the heart of the United States, with satellite locations in other countries. It would be the largest global demonstration of clean energy and sustainability the world had ever seen. Elon could feel the shift. People were beginning to believe again. This was no longer just a political battle, it was a movement, and the momentum was growing. But as the countdown to Humanity Now continued, Elon knew that the true test was yet to come. The forces against them were strong, and the stakes were higher than ever. It would be a battle, not just for the future of Project Humanity, but for the future of the planet. And Elon Musk was ready to lead that fight. The day of Humanity Now had arrived. The world was watching. What began as a distant dream was about to become a reality on the grandest stage imaginable. Elon Musk stood at the center of it all, feeling a mix of excitement and tension. The massive global demonstration was not just a showcase of technology and innovation. It was a statement to the world. It was proof that a sustainable future wasn't just possible, it was achievable. The event was held in a vast, state-of-the-art, temporary city in the Nevada desert, designed to showcase every aspect of the Project Humanity vision. The city was powered entirely by solar and wind energy, with electric vehicles serving as the main mode of transportation. All buildings were constructed using sustainable materials, and water was recycled through cutting-edge purification systems. The city also featured vertical farms and clean tech innovations that were only a glimpse of what the future could look like if the world fully embraced sustainability. The media was abuzz with coverage from every corner of the globe. News outlets were broadcasting live, showcasing the real-time impact of the event. Major social media platforms were flooded with updates, and celebrities, environmental activists, and world leaders shared their thoughts about the movement's potential. But the resistance was strong, and the meeting quickly devolved into a back-and-forth of arguments and counter-arguments. It became clear that a deal was nowhere near. The forces of inertia, backed by decades of vested interests, weren't going to give up easily. And that left Elon with a growing sense of urgency. He couldn't let this opportunity slip through his fingers. There had to be a breakthrough, something to rally the world to his cause. He needed to make the case clear, not just to the politicians and industry leaders, but to the public. They had to see that this was more than a political struggle. It was a fight for survival. And it was time to take the fight to the next level. Later that night, back in his office, Elon found himself pacing in frustration. The meeting had accomplished little more than to reinforce the fact that he was up against forces much bigger than himself. The government was divided, the corporations were circling, and the media was growing increasingly hostile. He felt like he was running out of time. Then it came to him, the perfect way to make the case to the world. He called a meeting with his closest advisors, including the teams from Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink. They gathered in the war room, their faces tired but determined. Elon wasted no time. "We need to do something bold. Something that will force the world to listen," he said, standing before the whiteboard. "We need to demonstrate what Project Humanity could look like on the ground in real time." A hushed silence followed his words. His advisors exchanged glances, trying to grasp what Elon was proposing. "I'm talking about a global demonstration," Elon continued. "A live event. Something that can't be ignored. We show the world what's possible right now. We'll build a fully sustainable city, powered by solar, wind, and electric energy. We'll put it all together in just a matter of weeks." The room erupted in a mix of excitement and disbelief. One of his engineers spoke up, "Elon, that's a massive undertaking. Do we have the resources to pull something like that off?" "We have to make the resources work," Elon replied, his voice firm. "If we can show people what's possible with the right technology, they won't be able to deny it anymore. They'll see it, they'll experience it, and we'll have the eyes of the world on us. It's time to prove that the future is now." The team quickly began to organize, reaching out to their partners, suppliers, and governments that had already shown support for Project Humanity. They would need vast amounts of energy, infrastructure, and manpower to make the vision a reality. Elon stood backstage, waiting for his moment to speak. The pressure weighed heavily on him. The fate of humanity now, and the future of Project Humanity, was on the line. If this demonstration didn't work, if it failed to capture the imagination of the public, all the work they had done up to this point would be for nothing. The political support could vanish, corporate backers could pull out, and the movement would lose momentum. But Elon was determined. He had faith in what they were doing. And most importantly, he had faith in the power of this moment. People weren't just waiting for change, they were ready for it. The question was whether they would believe that change was not just a hope, but a tangible possibility. The crowd's anticipation was palpable as Elon finally took the stage, walking in front of a massive projection screen that displayed the breathtaking visuals of the sustainable city. Behind him, the world's leaders, top scientists, and environmentalists were gathered, a powerful symbol of global unity. He paused for a moment, letting the words settle. "We've always known that change is necessary, but what we've learned here today is that change isn't just necessary, it's inevitable. And it's not something we have to wait for. It's something we can start building, right now, together. This city, this demonstration, is the beginning of that future. It's not just an idea anymore, it's a reality." As he spoke, footage of the sustainable city flashed on the screen behind him, showing people driving electric cars, children playing in solar-powered playgrounds, and clean energy power plants generating the energy that powered it all. There was a sense of optimism in the air, one that hadn't been seen in years. People were no longer just talking about change. They were seeing it, experiencing it, and realizing that a better world was possible. Elon continued, "But this isn't just about the technology, the vehicles, or the energy sources. It's about people. The families who will live in communities like this, the workers who will build the future economy, the children who will inherit this planet. This is a movement for all of us. We are in this together, and together, we will create a future that we can be proud of." The crowd erupted in applause. But even as the cheers echoed across the desert, Elon knew that this was just the beginning. The demonstration was impressive, but it was still just one city. The real challenge was scaling this solution across the globe. The real test would come when the world's governments and corporations had to decide whether they were willing to make the changes necessary to support a sustainable future. Back in Washington, D.C., the political climate was shifting. The global success of humanity now was undeniable, and pressure was mounting on politicians to align themselves with the movement. For the first time in months, Elon felt a glimmer of hope. There were signs that the narrative was beginning to change. Politicians who had been skeptical were now being forced to reconsider their positions, not because of the pressure from Elon's campaign, but because of the groundswell of public support that was beginning to rise. The media, once hostile, was now covering Project Humanity in a more favorable light. Even skeptics were starting to acknowledge the scale of the vision and the progress that had already been made. But despite the growing support, there were still powerful forces fighting against them. The fossil fuel industry wasn't about to let go of its grip on global energy without a fight. The next phase of the battle would be one of intense lobbying, negotiations, and political maneuvering. In private meetings with key allies, Obama encouraged Elon to stay the course. "This is the moment, Elon. You've got the world's attention. Now, we have to turn this movement into action. It's going to be a long road, but this is the path to change. The momentum is on our side." But Elon knew that the fight was far from over. The forces aligned against him were fierce. In the backrooms of power, corporate giants were already organizing their counteroffensive. They were pouring money into ad campaigns, working overtime to discredit Project Humanity, and lobbying governments to pull their support. Yet, Elon was undeterred. He had spent years fighting for what he believed in, from launching rockets to developing electric cars. He had faced setbacks before, but he had always bounced back. This time, it wasn't just about business or technology, it was about the survival of the planet. He returned to the drawing board, working late into the night with his team. They began crafting strategies to counter the corporate opposition, preparing for the next stage of the battle: mass mobilization and direct action. It was no longer enough to show the world the possibility of a better future. They had to make that future a reality, one decision at a time. The battle was entering its final phase, and Elon Musk knew that the true test was yet to come. He wasn't just leading a company, he was leading a revolution. The question was, would the world rise to the challenge, or would it continue down the path of destruction? One thing was certain. No matter what happened next, Elon Musk would not back down. The stakes were too high, and the future of humanity was on the line. This was the moment of truth, and Elon was ready to fight for it. The days after humanity now were a whirlwind. Elon Musk found himself at the center of a global movement that was rapidly gathering momentum. The world had seen the demonstration, and the reaction was overwhelming. People from all walks of life were clamoring for more, demanding that their governments take immediate action to support sustainable technologies and a green economy. The message was clear. The future was now, and the world wanted to be a part of it. But with great attention came even greater resistance. The fossil fuel industry had deep pockets and powerful allies in the highest echelons of government. They were not willing to relinquish their control over the global economy without a fight. In the weeks following Humanity Now, a barrage of negative media campaigns emerged aimed at discrediting the initiative. They called Project Humanity a utopian fantasy, claiming that such a transition was too costly, too risky, and ultimately unfeasible. Corporate-backed think tanks churned out reports claiming that the shift to clean energy would devastate jobs, disrupt industries, and bankrupt entire nations. Elon had expected this, but the reality of the battle ahead was still daunting. His team worked tirelessly, using every platform at their disposal to push back against the misinformation and keep the momentum alive. Social media, once a source of excitement, now became a battlefield. Protesters, advocates, scientists, and activists rallied in support, but so did the voices of opposition, questioning the feasibility of a world powered by clean energy. Yet Elon's resolve only grew stronger. As a new wave of support flooded in from citizens demanding climate action, the political tide began to shift. Public pressure was too great to ignore. President Obama, who had supported the campaign from the outset, stood firm, calling for a sweeping global agreement on clean energy and carbon reduction. The breakthrough came in the form of a historic treaty, an agreement between multiple nations to commit to a sustainable future. The treaty outlined specific targets for carbon emissions reduction, a roadmap for the transition to renewable energy, and economic incentives for companies to embrace clean technologies. It was a victory, but it was only one step in a much longer process. The real test would be how governments and corporations would implement these changes. Elon found himself at the heart of the negotiations, facing down some of the world's most powerful leaders. There were moments of tension, as industry giants attempted to rewrite the terms of the treaty to protect their interests, but Elon was resolute. He understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about business or profit, it was about survival. In one particularly tense meeting, a prominent oil magnate challenged Elon directly, arguing that the renewable energy industry could not support the global economy. "You want us to abandon the backbone of modern civilization for a pipe dream?" the magnate sneered. Elon leaned forward, locking eyes with the man. "I want us to build the backbone of the future. And we can do that by embracing the reality of climate change and the technology that exists to fight it. The future is not a fantasy. It's here, right in front of us." The room fell silent. It was a defining moment in the negotiations, one that shifted the dynamic. The industry leaders realized that their influence was waning. Public opinion was on Elon's side, and the tide of history was turning against them. Slowly, but surely, the treaty began to take shape, with Elon's vision at its core. A few months later, the treaty was officially signed by representatives from over 100 countries. It marked the beginning of a new era, an era where sustainable energy was not just an ideal but a global priority. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't a complete victory, but it was a massive step in the right direction. Elon Musk stood on stage at the signing ceremony, flanked by world leaders, scientists, and activists. He had won, but the battle wasn't over. He knew that implementing the treaty would take years, maybe even decades, but this was the turning point. The momentum was irreversible. The future had begun. "We've just taken the first step," Elon said to the crowd. "But it's only the beginning. The work ahead of us will be hard, but we will not stop. The stakes are too high. The future of our planet depends on what we do next." The applause that followed wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had joined the movement. It was a celebration of the millions of people who had worked tirelessly to make this day a reality. In the months that followed, Project Humanity continued to expand. New sustainable cities were being built in every corner of the world, powered by clean energy. Tesla, SpaceX, and other companies continued to lead the charge, rolling out new technologies that would reshape industries from transportation to agriculture. Elon's vision had sparked a global revolution, one that was no longer just about technology. It was about reshaping the very fabric of society. People everywhere were beginning to understand that they had a role to play in the future of the planet. Every decision, every action, mattered. The shift was not without its challenges. There were setbacks, opposition from entrenched interests, natural disasters exacerbated by climate change, and the inevitable political battles that would continue. But the foundation had been laid. The world was on a path to a sustainable future, and nothing could stop it now. As Elon stood overlooking one of the new cities being built in the heart of Africa, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The city was powered entirely by solar and wind energy, and the local community was thriving. It was proof that change was possible, that the future could be brighter, not just for the privileged few, but for everyone. In that moment, Elon knew that he had given everything for this cause. He had risked everything: his fortune, his reputation, his time, because he believed, with every fiber of his being, that this was the only way forward. The world wasn't perfect, but it was changing, and that was all that mattered. The battle was far from over, but Elon Musk had led the charge. He had shown the world that change was not only necessary but possible. And with that knowledge, the future was his, ours, and it would be shaped by the hands of a united humanity determined to build a better world. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the clean streets, Elon turned to face the horizon. The fight had been long, but the journey had just begun. The future, he knew, was limitless. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?